Naumi chit pratibham devim param bhairava yoginim matarmana prameyam shula bhuja kritaspadam. Om, salutations to that goddess, the flash of insight whereby consciousness recognizes herself. Salutations to that Shakti who is inseparable from Bhairava, who is the supreme reality in each and every moment manifesting herself as the trinity of knower, knowing, known. I praise that goddess who abides in this heart, mounted atop the trident, seated upon her lotus throne. Om Naumi Devim Sharirastham Nrityato Bhairavakrite Pravirin Megha Ghanna Vyoma Vidyulekha Vilasini. Om, I praise that goddess who abides in the body of the dancing Shiva. She is playful and beautiful, yet terrifying, like a streak of lightning flashing across the cloudy monsoon season sky. Om Meghanghim Vigatambaram Shavashivarudham Trinetrambaram Karnalam Madramunda Yugma Bhayadam Mundasrajam Bhishanam Vamadhurdvakaram Bhujam Narashira Kadagam Chasavitare Dhanabhiti Vimukta Keshane Chayam Vande Sada Kālikam Vande Sada Kālikam. Oh, I meditate on that goddess whose skin is black like a dark, splendorous storm cloud, who is mounted atop her husband in the form of a corpse, who has 3 eyes, who is garlanded in a garland of heads, who is holding in her upper left hand a sword, in her lower left hand a severed head, who is assuring fearlessness and offering boons with the mudras of her upper right and lower right hands. I meditate upon that goddess Kālī. Om Jayanti Mangala Kālī Bhadra Kālī Kapalini Durga Shiva Kshama Dhatri Swaha Swadha Namostute. Om Yathagnir Dahika Shakti Ramakrishna Stitahiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Saradam Pranamamyam. Om Saradaye Devi Kālī Rupinyue Namaha. I meditate on Kālī in the form of Sarada Devi. May this be an offering at her lotus feet. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. So happy Kāla Ashtami. As you know, it's the 8th day of the waning moon. So it's a particularly good day to contemplate Bhairava, to contemplate Kālī, and to contemplate the reality of the cremation ground, which is all pervasively true of this very moment. So entering into that realm of Kālī, we're asking one very important question. She is, importantly, svatantriya. This is perhaps the most important word in trying to understand Kālī. She cannot be understood. Not even the gods can understand her true nature, as Shankara points out in the Kālikashtakam. So she absolutely cannot be understood. And Komalakanta, in the very last verse of his song, Is My Mother Kālī Really Black? Shamar Ma Ki Amar Kalo. There he says, I've been trying to understand you my whole life, and as a result, I've gone mad. I've gone absolutely bonkers. So obviously you cannot understand her, but the reason why we cannot understand her, the reason why she's beyond all reason, is because she is svatantriya. So if anything, we can at least say this. Her freedom is so absolute and so radical and so complete that it cannot be confined by time-bound, space-bound logic constructs of the mind. She goes beyond all words. She goes beyond all thoughts. She's that avang manasa gochara, that field beyond all sentiment, beyond all expression, beyond all conception. In that sense, she is called svatantriya, in her inscrutability. Svatantriya means freedom. So you absolutely cannot conceive a fire without heat. Similarly, you cannot think of the absolute reality, Brahman or Shiva, without Shakti. Similarly, you cannot think of Shakti without svatantriya, without freedom. Her very being is freedom in and of itself. It's not enough to say that she is free. Obviously, she is free. But it's more than that. She is herself, freedom itself, freedom embodied. So that's the most important characterization, arguably, that we can offer to Ma Kālī, if any at all can be offered to this radiant void that surpasses all speech. So Kali is Swatantriya. Not that she has Swatantriya. She is Swatantriya. Swa means self, and Tantra means something like to expand. So Swatantriya means self-expanding, which has the connotation of aparichedana, like unlimited, which has also the connotation of advaita, because if something is limited, it can only be limited by the existence of something else. In fact, in the Vedanta Sara, we define limit as where one thing starts and another thing ends. So if my body ends here and the world starts there, then in one sense, I'm limited by my body because the world is over there and my body is over here. And so where this body ends, and by that we typically mean where my sphere of sensation ends, the world begins. So that's a clear limit. My body is limited because there is a conceivable end to it, which is the end of sensation. And then beyond that sphere of sensation, there is a world that is seemingly outside of sensation. A lot of it is outside perception, outside of knowledge. And so I say, I'm here and the world is there. You see, so this idea of paricheda, limit, is really defined as where one thing ends and another thing begins. But Kali is not like that. The absolute reality doesn't end anywhere. There's nothing beyond it. It is aparichedana. It's without any limit. And if it's without any limit, notice what we're saying. No second thing apart from it exists which could possibly limit it. So if you say there is a God, you no longer have any ground to stand upon because God is all pervasively present, meaning she must be where Bhairavi Nikila Devi is standing. She must be where Sai is standing or where Gretchen is standing. There can be no place in this universe which is vacuum to God, which is void of God. Otherwise, that would be a limit to God because then God would end and you would begin. Or God would end and matter would begin. Or God would end and hell would begin. Or the devil would begin. Or something like that. You see how ridiculous this kind of thinking is? If God were to end anywhere, it's only because of the existence of something that is not God. Namely the devil or hell or the world or matter or you. Right? Only then could God be limited. If something other than God existed. But nothing of the sort. That's to limit God itself is fundamentally opposed to the conception of God in almost every theistic system in the world. God is unlimited. Who can limit God? To even think of a limit for God would be a big problem. That's why no religion can say they alone are true. If any religion gets up and says, we are alone correct, our version of God is the only one true God, what they've done is they've added a limit to God. They're saying God is only this and not that. So why can't God be a monkey? Why can't God be an ogre? Why can't God be formless? Why can't God have form? By definition, God can be any one of these things and all of these things and none of these things at the same time. Because who is there who can limit God? So if you accept God, axiomatically, you also have to accept that God is absolute and limitless. And therefore, you have to accept one more thing, Advaita. You cannot accept God, a limitless God at least, along the lines of absolute theism. You cannot accept a limitless God unless you also concede to this one fact, to God's Advaita, to God's non-duality. You see? Yes, God is maximally all the forms, and this is important. Because God is unlimited, and because limit is defined as where one thing ends and where another thing begins, God is therefore, by virtue of this logic, Advaita, non-dual. And that Advaita is synonymous with limitlessness, but it's also synonymous with freedom. You see, because the only way your freedom can be curtailed is if you come up against a limit. So if you want to move into the next room and there's just walls all around you and you come up against a wall, then that's a paricheda, a limit, because now you can't go beyond the wall unless you were a ghost or Harry Potter or something like that. But if somebody were to remove that wall, meaning if somebody were to remove that limit, you would have the freedom to move beyond, you see. So a limitation is the same as a lack of freedom. But where there are no limitations, where there is no reality apart from God, where can God be limited? You see, so where can God be anything but Advaita and anything but free? So if you accept God as absolute and limitless, then you must accept that God is Advaita. By that virtue, you must accept that God is free. So the definition of God actually is freedom itself. Swatantriya Shakti. So that's a long time ago, we gave a talk. Let me show you where it is actually. I think it's a particularly important one. It's a nice one. And it was many years ago when we were contemplating the various aspects of Kali. So in this Kali, Goddess of the Tantra series, this is the lecture that I'm referencing, the radical freedom of Ma Kali. So in this lecture, we're talking about exclusively this svatantra, this freedom of Ma Kālī, the radical freedom of Ma Kālī. And there we were talking about how this freedom is depicted in her iconography as this mukta keshi idea. So she's alokeshi, she's mukta keshi, meaning her hair is wild and free. But the reason her hair is like that, like a prostitute's almost, is to imply that she has no constraints. Her hair is not braided, or it's not even bound in jatta. I mean, yes, in some dhyana shlokas, in some depictions of Ma, she does have jatta, but usually her hair is wild. It's not matted in like yogi's locks, nor is it bound nicely like Lakshmi or Saraswati, who are seen as very civilized forces. Wealth and knowledge, these are forces that exist within time, space, and causality in a sense. But Kālī, who is the primordial power beyond all civilization, beyond all speech, beyond all thought, she is depicted as wild and frenzied and unbound. So her unbound hair is the symbol par excellence for her Svatantriya Shakti. But not just that, when we see her in the Chandi or in various places in which her Leela is depicted, we find that it's like uncontrollable power. So much so that the gods are like terrified and they're all trying to find a way to contain her. But in the more radical Shakta text, you see that this power cannot be contained and it is folly to try to contain it. So that idea of Svatantriya is depicted in her dance. She dances the Tandava. There's a beautiful song called the Kālī Tandava Stotram. Very powerful. And if you sing it, the room will shake kind of song, And so there, like the Shiva Tandava, Kālī has a Tandava, which is this dance of destruction with one sweep of her brazen foot. Planets trampled under, in a universe of flame and soot. That's the idea that Kālī is so unbound that her dancing is frenzied and destructive and her hair is wild and free. So notice, even in the iconography of that which cannot be conceived, there is a strong emphasis on this freedom. So we'll start tonight's talk with this main idea that what Kālī is freedom. She is Svatantra itself. And she has Svatantra. She's free. So in a sense, everything that happens is by her and in her and for her. So Sri Ramakrishna would say not even a leaf moves on the tree without her will. And he would often describe that will as sweet play, almost like a whimsy, almost like her fancy, or like something almost frivolous, almost trifling, dare I say? Like it's just her play. This is what she does. War, death, famine, beauty and triumph. Triumph and tragedy alike, both are her sweet will, her play, and all of this is a real manifestation of Kālī, and it's a real manifestation of Kālī dancing. That's why if you try to contemplate it, you go mad, because of the sheer totality of it. It includes all the opposites, all the poles, the extreme dualities of the universe are all reconciled in this one symbol called Kālī. So she's free. But another thing you have to understand about freedom is that in this tradition, Svatantriya is not only synonymous with aparicheda and advaita. In other words, Svatantriya, freedom, is not only synonymous with limitlessness and non-duality, but freedom is synonymous also with another thing, kartritva, meaning agency. So freedom to act. So her freedom is expressed as this world. This world is essentially Ma Kālī's ecstatic kirtan or her destructive Tandava dance, or this world is essentially the expression of her freedom. So it's kind of like, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. It's like if you're free and you know it, if you're Kālī and you know it, if you're limitless and you know it, if you're non-dual and you know it, manifest a world and destroy a world also. So creation, maintenance, dissolution, Shrishti, Sthiti, Vinashanam, this whole thing, this drama, is the agency of Mother Kālī, kartritva, which means action or will. And so here, Svatantriya, and this is unique, I think, to the Svatantriya Vada or to this non-dual Shaiva or Shakta tradition. This Svatantriya is articulated as the expression of the universe, meaning as action, as doership, or rather as power. So what is Shakti? This power that is this universe. And that power is essentially the freedom of the absolute reality, which you might call Brahman or Shiva or Kālī or Durga, whoever you want. But that absolute reality is endowed with freedom, and that freedom is understood as action. Karatritva. Okay, so like the first premise for today's discussion about freedom and about determinism is this. The absolute reality is always conceived of as free. Okay, now the next question we have to ask. If the absolute reality is advaita, meaning non-dual, then I cannot exist as a reality apart from it. So therefore, the next claim we make is it's not just that God is free and God is unlimited and God is absolute. The next claim we make in this tradition is that you are God, that your very essence nature is one with God. But that's incredibly confusing to say, Because if that were true, if you, and it is, and we argue that it absolutely is, but if that were true, if you were one with God, wouldn't you also be free? In other words, if Ma Kali is absolutely free, and if you are Ma Kali, the obvious conclusion of these two premises is that you are free, absolutely and radically free. Right? That's the only thing you can conclude from this. You are Ma Kali is free, therefore you are absolutely free. It's like the simplest syllogism. Mm. But herein lies the complication. The great masters of all the world traditions have always stressed the complete surrender, helplessness, and dependence of the human embodied experience to God. So here you'll hear Sri Ramakrishna say something like, I can of my own self do nothing. In fact, in many conversations with many people, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa Dev defined liberation. In fact, he defined jīvanmukti, embodied liberation, as the firm conviction that God alone is the doer. That's the definition, actually, of what it means to be free in this world. So we talked about that a lot in the previous lecture. It was called Is There Free Will, I think. So this is sort of a follow-up to that lecture, because there I made a case for what I call absolute theistic determinism. In that lecture, I said if you accept God, in other words, if you accept any kind of theism whatsoever, logically you will be pushed into a position to accept the absolutism of that theistic idea. So God is absolute, which means you must accept determinism. So my claim is that you cannot both have God and free will, because your free will would be a limit to God's freedom. That was the argument in the previous lecture. So I was making a case for determinism, but herein lies a complication. Because like I just said, the ultimate nature of reality is considered to be freedom embodied, and you are that. So aren't you also free? Doesn't that directly contradict what we said in the last lecture about determinism? That we are only machines and mother alone is the operator, that we are only a house in which mother dwells, that we are only carriages and mother is the driver. So Sri Ramakrishna defined freedom, meaning the liberation of the embodied soul, as the recognition of lack of freedom. So when the soul realizes that I can of my own self do nothing, my mother who is in heaven and who is in the earth and who is everywhere does all of this through me, if someone really understands that, then they're free, which is a paradox. True freedom lies in surrender, in the devotional offering of the body and mind to God, which really is not an offering, but a recognition that it's already of God. It's already God's. And so I can't even draw breath without her own sweet will. I cannot of my own will even take in one breath. And not even a leaf moves except by the will, by the play, by the whimsy of the Divine Mother. So my very breath that I'm drawing now, my very words that I'm speaking now, they are entirely determined by Ma. But Ma is not determined. That's the idea. Ma is not determined, and yet this body, this mind, this person absolutely is. And what realization looks like, according to Sri Ramakrishna, is just recognizing that fact and living according to it. Recognizing that I cannot breathe, I cannot speak, I cannot move, I cannot do anything except by the Divine Mother's will. And not only that, everything that happens to quote unquote me, everyone that I meet, everything that I hear, every tragedy and triumph that arises in my experience, all of that is the Divine Mother's sweet will. An expression of her freedom, her kartritva, her agency, which is rooted in svatantriya, freedom. So understanding that, according to Sri Ramakrishna, is what it means to be free. A person who's firmly convinced that God alone is the doer is a person who is truly free in this world. So Sri Ramakrishna was very fond of singing that song. Shakali tumari cha. And in that song there's a line, Tumi rati ami rata, where it says in Bengali, you are the chariot driver, and I am the chariot, the rata. And another part of that song, it says, Tumi jantri, ami jantro, which means you are the yantri, the operator of the machine, and I am just a yantra, I'm just a machine, and I'm being operated, I'm being acted upon, like I cannot act. That's the idea. Mother alone can act, and this body and this mind is being acted upon by Mother. And all of its expressions are Mother's expressions, and I can't do, of my own self, I can't do anything. So Sri Ramakrishna was very fond of that song, that Ram Prasad song. He would sing it all the time, and he was very fond of telling people that like there's absolutely nothing in this world that happens except by the will of the Divine Mother. And once you recognize that, you're free. So I want to tell you now 4 stories about Swami Vivekananda and his experience of this radical surrender and non-doership. And I think these stories are very important because we know that Swamiji was all about radical action and radical freedom. His message was a message of Advaita, non-duality, the recognition that I am eternally free. that I am Brahman and endowed with infinite power. That was his message in his life, as you saw when you studied his life of Swami Vivekananda by Eastern and Western disciples, when you studied the biography of Swami Nikhilanandaji, and when you read his works. What you saw is that he was an unstoppable force of tremendous action and freedom. And so these four stories, I think, are in stark contrast to that, because they express what his inner attitude was to Kali. And you'll see, much like his master Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda was radically surrendered. He truly felt like he could of his own self do nothing, and that Mother was doing everything through him. He felt that about Sri Ramakrishna, so he revealed something in a very private conversation to Sister Nivedita about who Sri Ramakrishna really was, as an incarnation of Kali. And then he expressed something to Sister Nivedita again in private about his own attitude. And he expressed similar sentiments to Sharat Chandra Chakravarti. And these were all private conversations. So they give us a glimpse into the inner reality of Swami Vivekananda, what he actually felt and thought. I mean, who knows? But these little revelations, in his own words, give us a glimpse as to his own surrender. So what we find in Sri Ramakrishna, what we find in Swami Vivekananda, in fact, what we find in all the great spiritual masters of the world, whether they are theist or non-theist, what you generally tend to find is this attitude of, I can't do anything. I can of my own self do nothing. Something is acting through me, whether it's Prakriti or whether you want to call it Shakti or God or whatever, Allah or Jesus or whatever, the Father, whatever name you give it. Almost always you'll find these people of great spiritual maturity. They will almost always make a claim like this. Yeah, and Ruth is right. It's like this most radical sense of humility, but it cannot even be called humility because there isn't even a person there who is humble. Like it's so beyond pride and humility because it's like a total vacuum of the individual. And with that, this wonderful liberation, and weirdly enough, paradoxically enough, an ocean of action and activity. So a person who's truly surrendered like this, like the Buddha or like Swami Vivekananda, are usually world movers. The Christ said, everything that I do, my Father in heaven does through me. I can of my own self do nothing. But then he said to his disciples, these and even greater works shall ye do. So the things that he did, these works, he admits that they are works, that they are actions, but he knows that he can't do anything. And weirdly enough, that is helpful to his action. Like it seems to directly produce action. So that's the paradox of it. Somebody like Swami Vivekananda or Buddha, they're radically surrendered beings. And yet they're also radically active beings. So therein lies another paradox. So I want to tell you these four stories. Swami Mahayoganandaji actually yesterday gave a beautiful talk called Swami Vivekananda and the Divine Mother. So it's on YouTube, on the Vedanta Society of Southern California YouTube page. Highly recommend that you listen to that lecture also. It's beautiful. And I'll just give a few stories, and you'll hear those stories also in Swami Mahayogananda's talk, because they're like key stories that describe the relationship between Swami Vivekananda and the Divine Mother. So Swami Mahayoganandaji's talk was focused on that relationship that Swamiji had with Kālī, which is a very deep, sacred, and special relationship that he was very private about. And my focus today in this lecture is to talk about the same four stories, but this time in response to the question, am I really free? If Mother is free and am I Mother, then and I am Mother, then am I free? And what does that freedom look like? And what is it to be absolutely free consciousness, but at the same time be a devotee who understands that I can of my own self do nothing? That's the real question that I want to ask. And I want to use these four stories, ideally, to furnish an answer. Ma willing. Yes, that's where we're headed. So let's get into it. Story time. Let's tell four stories from the life of Swami Vivekananda. So we already know that Sri Ramakrishna very rarely would have said, I am Brahman. Very rarely. He would never say, Aham Brahmasmi or anything like that. In fact, once he was singing a song, and it's the famous song from Sri Shankara, where it's like, Manno buddhi ahankara chittani naham nacha shrotra jive nacha grana netre nacha vyoma bhumi na tejo na vayus. Now Sri Ramakrishna agrees with all of that. I am not the mind, I am not the intellect, I am not the ego, I am not my memories. I am not the organs of perception nor the objects of perception. But then the next line, this is where it gets interesting. The next line is Shivoham, Shivoham, Chidananda Rupam, Shivoham, Shivoham. So up to this point, Sri Ramakrishna is perfectly comfortable with the song. Manno, Buddhi, Ahankara, Chittani, Naham. Absolutely. I am not none of these things. Nacha Shrotra, na Jive, nacha Grana, na Netre. Okay, no problem. I am not any of my senses. After all, they all belong to the Divine Mother. No problem. In the next statement, Nacha Vyoma, na Bhumi, na Tejo, na Vayush. Absolutely no problem there. The whole world is Prakriti. I am but Purusha in which the Prakriti appears. But then he bristled at the next line. The famous line of Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. Now, he has attained nirvikalpa samadhi. He studied under Totapuri and attained such a high state of Advaita. He was perfectly established in Advaita. And yet, when this line came, he bristled and he said, not Shivoham, not Shivoham, Shivotwam, Shivotwam. His claim was like, I can't say I am Shiva because now in this present state of experience, I say you are Shiva. Shivotwam, Shivotwam. So he rejected this Advaitic statement that I am Shiva in favor of what seems to be a more dualistic expression of you are Shiva and I love you. I am the devotee and you are God. Okay, so now this is the interesting thing about Sri Ramakrishna's theism. It was an absolute non-dual theism. So he's saying that there is a God, but that God is not separate from the world. So another key teaching in Sri Ramakrishna is that God becomes the 24 cosmic principles. So in one very private conversation with M, the recorder of the gospel, Sri Ramakrishna, he's asked by M, Sir, is this world real? And of course, M is coming from an Advaita Vedanta, like Drishti, Shrishti, Ajatavada kind of worldview here. He's saying like, I've been told that the world is nothing but name and form. Nama Rupa. And because they are superimpositions onto Brahman, the one reality, the names and forms are all in and of themselves unreal. They're inherently void. They're devoid of substance. So he asked this to Sri Ramakrishna point blank, Sir, is the world unreal? And Sri Ramakrishna's response is, why should it be unreal? God alone has become the 24 cosmic principles, referring to Sankhya here. God has become the 5 bhutas, pancha bhutas, the 5 elements. God has become the tanmatras, the subtle elements that make up our subtle perceptions. God has, and this is important, God has become our organs of action and our organs of perception. So God is the feet, the hands, the anus, the genitals. God is the mouth. God is the nose and the tongue and the eyes and the skin and the ears. God has become all the feet and all the heads. That's why in the Vedas, there's that beautiful hymn. Sahasra Sheshaha Purushaha Sahasraksha Sahasrapat Sa Bhumim Vishvato Vritvatya Tishta Dashangulam. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful sentiment. Sahasra Shirshaha. You are that reality who has 1,000 heads. Sahasra Shirshaha. Purushaha, you are that supreme spirit with 1,000 heads. Sahasra Shirsha, Purusha, Sahasraksha, Sahasrapat. You have 1,000 eyes. Sahasraksha. And also you have Sahasrapat, Pada, meaning feet. So you are that reality. Oh, and you could say it's Vishnu or Shiva or Brahman or whatever. The absolute reality is defined as having 1,000 heads. Now, you know, when you read the Tao Te Ching, it'll say like, oh, mother of 10,000 things. The Tao is the Tao that cannot be named, and it's the mother of 10,000 things. So when the author is saying 10,000, I don't think he literally means 10,000. There's a convention in the literature of this time period where it's like hyperbole. When you want to express an infinite number, you would say something like 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 or something. So even if you say like 1 lakh, you know, you're reading a tantra and it says, chant this mantra 1 lakh times in the day and 1 lakh times at night. So that ultimately comes out to 200,000 repetitions of the mantra. So that's like 2,000 malas, if you will. But I don't think they mean it literally. Not always. I mean, they could, who knows. But usually this is hyperbole, which means just an infinite number, an inconceivably big sum. So when we say Sahasra Shirshaha, Sahasra Sahasraksha, Sahasrapat, we're saying God has 1,000 heads, meaning innumerable heads. God has 1,000 eyes, meaning innumerable eyes. God has 1,000 feet, meaning innumerable feet. So therefore, all the feet of the centipede and the millipede, they're God's feet. Your feet are God's feet. Your eyes are God's eyes. Your head is God's head. And that's true of every being. So in this hymn, Sahasra, Shirshaha, Sahasraksha, Sahasrapad, that hymn describes God's immanent nature as embodied as all beings. So this is what Sri Ramakrishna is expressing when he's saying God alone has become the 24 cosmic principles. It's not just that God has become material nature, God has also become the individual embodied soul endowed with 5 organs of action, 5 organs of perception. But you know, none of that would matter if the individual soul did not have interiority. So this is an important point. What makes you an embodied soul is this experience of interiority, subjectivity, perception. It's called the antakarana, this inner instrument. So I can think and I can remember and I can discern and I have this sense of I, ahankara, this abhimana, this feeling of all of this is happening to me. I am moving, I am speaking, I am hearing, I am smelling, I am tasting. And to me appears this world of five bhutas and five tanmatras. Like that ahankara, coupled with the manas, the ability to think, coupled with the chitta, the storehouse of memories, coupled with the buddhi, the all-important discerning faculty, all of that makes up what we consider to be an embodied soul, actually. And mother alone has become that. This is very important. Mother hasn't just become the world, and she hasn't really just become the legs and the feet. Thank you, Myra. Yeah, you're right. That's a good link. But no, more importantly, mother has become the minds. So everybody is essentially a mind in which a body is perceived, through which a world is projected. Mother is all of that. You see, what a profound claim. When we really understand what the 24 tattvas of Sankhya are and what they refer to, and then we can look at Sri Ramakrishna's statement and marvel at its profundity. He's saying that God alone, the absolute reality, Brahman endowed with Shakti, has become embodied, has become the universe. That's why in the Virupaksha Panchashika that we were studying on Friday last week, it says, Namo Vishwa Shariraya. I praise that Lord who is embodied, whose body, Sharira, is this universe. So God is defined as that consciousness who is embodied as the universe. But what that means is that you are God, or rather that this body, this mind is God's. And the whole thing, the individuality that you feel, God is that. God has become that in a very real way. It's not just that God appears as that. God is that. And that's why Sri Ramakrishna's claim in the Bengali is Hoi Chin, which means becomes, is very interesting. Is he saying parinama, like actual transformation, the way the milk becomes curd? Is he saying vivarta, like God appears to be? It's not quite clear, but it's definitely in response to M's idealism. Like M is asking, is the world real? Basically, he's asking, is the world a dream? Is the world a mistake? Is it avidya? And Sri Ramakrishna responds to that in that particular conversation by saying, why should it be unreal? God is real, and God, Hoichin, has become the 24 cosmic principles. Sasra, Shirsha, Sasrakshra, Purusha, Sasrakshra, Sasrapad. Profound. So this is Sri Ramakrishna claiming that the world is real, but it's real as God. Not necessarily as a product of God, or as an effect of God, or as a part of God, but it's real as God in her entirety. So, where were we going with this? I was excited about that particular Sri Ramakrishna. This. So Sri Ramakrishna's teaching, yeah, thank you, Ruth. Thank you. There are some stories I want to tell you. But Sri Ramakrishna's teaching seems to be absolutism and theism. So God is, obviously Sri Ramakrishna is a theist because God is one of the centerpieces of Sri Ramakrishna's life and message. But God is, importantly here, the absolute reality, who is everything, who is unlimited by anything, who is not only transcendent, but who is fully embodied and immanent as the world as well. So Sri Ramakrishna would say the inferior devotee, you could say, the inferior devotee regards God as this transcendent only reality. So if you think that God is some being in the sky or something like that, Sri Ramakrishna actually defines that as inferior bhakti. The Madhya Bhakta, the slightly better Bhakta, the middling devotee, is someone who understands that God is the indweller in all beings. So this is a slightly higher understanding, but it's still not the highest. It's not the Uttama Bhakti yet. It's not the highest realization. See, usually when we think of God, we think of some being in the sky, transcendent, beyond matter, beyond this world of change, death, and decay. God is pristine, God is pure, God is unchanging. So God cannot be this world, which is seemingly the opposite of that, decaying, transient, temporary, full of suffering, etc. So the weak devotee, arguably manda, let's say beginner, the beginner who thinks of God will usually think of God in this way. She's transcendent. But then a person who gets a bit closer to God, who has a slightly more mature understanding of God, she will see God as the indweller in every being. So now there's a world and God is in it. God's not just beyond the world. Of course, God is also that. But God is also in the world as the individual embodied soul. So behind every pair of eyes, God is looking. So in every body, in every like plant, in every animal, God is there. So this is slightly better because now you're recognizing God's immanence. But it's still limited because there's a duality here. You're seeing that God is immanent in all beings, but God is in the being, the way water would be like in this, like say coffee is in this cup. Once a sadhu gave me advice. He said, I'm very much a fan of your videos. I love watching your talks. Only two problems. You talk way too fast and you're all over the place. So he said, I have two pieces of advice for you. Number one, use more graphics. Unfortunately, I never have. Not really. I mean, I have. There were some times when we had some graphics. He was like, use more graphics. And then he said, another thing, don't drink so much chai. So unfortunately, I violated that rule because I have some caffeine. Is that Shakti? No, it's caffeine. So, but what's the difference? Anyway, so now the idea is that God is immanent, but there's still a duality, you see, because here God is in the cup the way the coffee is in the cup. Coffee is different from cup, but coffee is in the cup. So the you could, to use this example, you could say the weak devotee thinks coffee is something other than cup. There's cup and there's coffee. Coffee is transcendent. The slightly better devotee, she feels that no, there's coffee in the cup, but still there's a cup, meaning still there's a body, there's a mind, there's a world, and it's not God. Right? Not interested. But in that reality called cup is another reality called coffee. So notice the duality here. Then Sri Ramakrishna makes the statement about the Uttama Bhakta, the supreme devotee. So the supreme devotee is allegedly someone who knows that God has become everything. So God is not just in everyone as the indweller, God is everyone. You see the difference? Previously, there is a person and God is the indweller. God is inside there somewhere. Now, that duality of person and indwelling God is erased. Now, God is the flesh, is the bones, is the blood, is the feet and the hands and the organ of voiding and the organ of reproduction and the organ of speaking, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the skin. The whole thing is God. So duality is erased. So notice, Sri Ramakrishna obviously is that Uttama Bhakta because he has these realizations where he sees that mother has become the cat, mother has become the prostitute. I see that mother has become all of these beings. So he's not experiencing God in people, he's experiencing God as people. And he was very interested in people in the Nara Leela because he revered them as God incarnate. Obviously, different manifestations in different people. He recognized that God could be more manifest in one person and less manifest in another. But the fact is, it's God alone who appears as all of this. This is the Uttama Bhakta. So notice what we get now. We get Advaita, right? We get Advaita because here we see that God is all pervasively present in the immanent as well as the transcendent. Now, we've been studying the Rauravagama section called the Shiva Jnana Bodha together. And you saw in the verse that we studied last time in our free will lecture, you saw that the verse said, Anya San Vyaptito Nanyaha Vyaptito. So God is Anya, meaning God is an other. God is something other than this world. In other words, God is transcendent. San, while Nanyaha Vyaptito. So while remaining not other. So the claim in the Rauravagama Tantra about Shiva is that God, Shiva, is something other than the world, transcendent, but not transcendent only, as the weak devotee would think. Not a judgment, just a mood. But the middle devotee thinks no, God is in the world. Karmanu sarataha. The text says, that verse says, that God is transcendent, yet God is also immanent because God is all pervasive. So one way to understand that is, as Sri Ramakrishna argued, the world is just like God in totality. So Sri Ramakrishna accepted God, meaning he's a theist, but he accepted an absolute theism, which means God is non-dual, not only transcendent, not only immanent, both transcendent and immanent, and no reality other than God exists. That's another thing. And thirdly, and this is very important, that this reality acts, that creation, preservation, and destruction are inseparably God. So like God is not just Brahman who doesn't act. God is a creator, a maintainer, a destroyer. God plays, and everything is happening by the will of God. So Sri Ramakrishna seemed to accept a more tantric version of the absolute reality, as opposed to the Advaita Vedanta version of Brahman, which does not act. In Advaita Vedanta, remember, Brahman is Nishkriya, meaning actionless. The Tantrics call Advaita Vedanta Shanta Brahmavada, the doctrine of the quiescent Brahman. Because in the Advaita Vedanta system, Brahman does not create the world. We do. We, in our ignorance, superimpose onto Brahman the categories known as world, individual soul, and God. So it's like look, you know how we said last week? It's like seeing a rope, but mistaking it for a snake. There's no real snake. Somebody might look at the rope and say, oh, look, a crack in the ground. How boring. Someone else might look and say, oh, look, it's a garland. How wonderful. I want it. And someone else might look and say, hey, look, a snake. Ah! Like behind Francis G, there are all the snakes. So you might get scared. You're like, ah, snakes. So notice the experience of boredom, the experience of desire, the experience of fear, they're all like stupid because they're based on Bhranti, error. So this error is called adhyasa, superimposition, or it can just be called avidya. Avidya just means you just messed up. You saw a rope and you thought it was something else. You thought it was a snake. So the point I want to make here is that the rope, this is very important, the rope cannot be held responsible for the appearance of the snake. The rope did not create the snake. Like we were saying last week at our Buddha Purnima lecture, the rope did not create the snake. It did not create the garland. It did not create the sense that there is a crack in the earth. The rope is just there. But we, in our ignorance, superimpose onto the rope the thought, snake, or garland, or something like that, you see? So, in the exact same way, Brahman is just there, and then we misread Brahman and instead see the world and see God and see individual souls. So, creation, maintenance, dissolution, the Leela, God's play, all of that is called avidya. It's a superimposition, it's ignorance. And that's, I think, a very important point. And what happens when you dispel that ignorance? When you realize Advaita, in other words, when you attain, let's say, nirvikalpa samādhi, then you go beyond Shakti. In other words, you go beyond maintenance, dissolution, creation. You go beyond the Leela, and then you're abiding in like what seems to be a Brahman-only experience. Shakti here, in terms of experience, might be attenuated. There's no dynamic aspect. And what you experience is pure consciousness without any action whatsoever. So Sri Ramakrishna, he says like this is Nirguna Brahman, and he likens it to a snake which is still. He says there's one snake only, and when it's still, it's called Nirguna Brahman. And this is the Brahman of Advaita Vedanta only. Brahman in Advaita Vedanta does not wriggle, it does not act. But Sri Ramakrishna says this same snake which is still can also wriggle. And when it wriggles, I call it Shakti. And then he will say Brahma or Shakti abhed. So Jini Brahma, Tini Shakti, Tini Ima. That woman who I'm calling Ma, that Kālī, the Dakshineshwari, the Bhavatarini Ma, who is praying to and doing puja to. He's saying that person that I call Ma, that I refer to as my mother, is Shakti. Adi Shakti, the primordial power. And she is none other than Brahman. Here he might be quoting a Ram Prasad song actually. Because in one Ram Prasad song, in Shama Sangeet, Ram Prasad says, he alone, it alone, see in Bengali there's no he or she like that. The pronouns aren't gendered in this way. But it alone is Brahman, which I called Kālī. He says that, like what I call Kālī is Brahman. Oh mind, must I give away the secret in this marketplace? Oh my mind, from the hints that I have given, guess what that reality is. So there's a particular song where Ram Prasad is saying, he alone I address as mother. Sorry, he says, he alone I address as mother. It alone I address as mother. So Sri Ramakrishna might have that song in mind. We know that like Bumblebee in the Transformers movies, he teaches a lot through songs, like sound bites from culture. And so he might have had this song in mind, but this was his highest, arguably his highest teaching in terms of the absolute nature of reality, that Brahman is the same as Kālī, which means Brahman is inseparably also Shakti. And that Shakti is the creating, maintaining, destroying power of the universe. This is what we call the snake wriggling. So if the snake is still, it's called, what do you call it? It's called Nirguna Brahman of Advaita Vedanta. And sorry, Rohanji, I forget. Right now I'm forgetting the name of that song. Somebody might know it, maybe. Where he says, oh, my mind, in the marketplace, must I give away the secret? From the hints I've given, guess what that reality is, or something like that. He alone I address as Brahman. So it's energy, but it cannot be thought of as, I think it's hard to think of it in terms of like physics, in terms of like potential, kinetic energy, gravitational energy. All of those are included in this energy, but it's better to think of it not as energy, I think, but as activity, as a divine principle of activity, which maybe you can see in electricity and in fire, heat, in gravity, and all of that. So there's this activity. And so notice what Sri Ramakrishna does here is he takes the roped snake idea of Sri Shankara and he gets rid of the rope and he keeps the snake. And he says when the snake is still, it's what Advaita Vedanta calls Nirguna Brahman. But when the snake wriggles, it creates, maintains, and destroys. So it's almost like it depends entirely on your frame of reference. If you're in nirvikalpa samādhi, you might experience Shiva without Shakti, a Brahman-only model. But outside of nirvikalpa samādhi, that same reality, which a moment ago was experienced as still, is now experienced as wriggling, as dynamic. And maybe a certain kind of person can experience them both at the same time, because that's the ultimate nature of reality. It's a snake that is both still and wriggling at the same time. So we know in Sri Ramakrishna's absolute theism, this reality called Brahman has Shakti. has dynamic action. So it's like there's no duality here between the real and the unreal. There is only the real, and that real is both Shiva and Shakti. But importantly, where does he fit into all of this? Remember, if God is everything, then where does the devotee fit? After all, if it's only God, how can there be a second reality apart from God called the devotee? And yet, Sri Ramakrishna would often speak in this way. He would say, in me there are two beings. There is God and God's devotee. Ma and Ma's devotee. How do you make sense of that? With the same logic, the snake is both still and it wriggles. Shiva is endowed with Shakti. And remember, in our tradition, we argue that Shakti means vimarshana, self-reflexive ability. So actually, the devotee and God are not two realities. The devotee is a reality that inheres inseparably as God's self-savoring. So that's an important thing to think about. The devotee is inherent in God as God's faculty for self-reflection, for self-savoring, for self-enjoyment. Brahman is just prakasha, consciousness only, but Shakti is vimarshana, consciousness with self-reflexive ability. So what devotion is the real realizing the real. It's consciousness representing itself to itself, which is ultimately what it does. The nature of consciousness is love, but it's self-love, if you will. Consciousness loves on itself. Shiva loves on himself through Shakti. So they're always in Yamala, in sexual union. It's a very important metaphor because, the reason why humans crave sex on the bodily level is because it's this like desire for unity. And they feel like I'm over here and that person is over there. Now I sense a duality and I want to transcend duality. Each and every one of us deep down inside, we feel this calling towards Advaita, towards non-duality. It's impossible. Devotees alike, jnanis alike, everyone is moving towards oneness. In fact, even science, it's a quest for oneness. So the basic impulse towards sexuality is the holiest thing in the universe because it's the same impulse that every atom feels towards the absolute oneness that science talks about, maybe as the unified field or something like that. Every human endeavor is the quest for oneness, including the libido. So now, there's an individual, and they encounter another individual, and a perceived duality is set up, a polarity is set up. And it's totally free of all gender, by the way. That polarity might be determined by past karmas, whatever it may be. So you don't need a concept of man or a concept of woman or a polarity between the sexes, nothing like that. You could have two men or two women or two gender non-binary people, but when two of them come together, they're set up a kind of polarity. One pole you can call Shiva, the other pole you can call Shakti. And there's a perceived separation of the two. Again, not using these terms in their gendered sense. Then the desire for sex is the desire for union. But you try to get closer and closer. First, you try to get mentally close by thinking about that person. And when there's sufficient mental and emotional closeness, then maybe there'll be an attempt at physical closeness. And then the final act of physical closeness might be some kind of copulation, some kind of intercourse or something like that. And even then, it's not quite like real oneness because the bodies still feel separate. And as much as you try to smush the bodies and minds together, there is still that feeling of slight difference between me and that person. So the whole thing is this frenzied, desperate act to attain Advaita, which can in some cases be quite violent and quite disturbing. But in the rare case where it's done correctly with the right approach, with deep reverence and devotion and understanding, then it's possible that in the moment of orgasm, and Anthony Kiedis has a beautiful line in what's the name of that song? But there's a beautiful line that he sings there, and he says, he talks about simultaneous release. And I think he has in mind this idea of the oneness achieved through orgasm. But notice, it's incredibly fleeting. So if it's possible to attain that simultaneous release, as in the Anthony Kiedis lyric, then in that moment, just for a moment, which can feel like an eternity in some cases, I don't feel like my body, that person doesn't feel like their body. I am in them and they are in me in a very physical sense, in a very emotional and mental sense, and in that energetically heightened state, which is it's a flood of electricity in the nervous system. In that state, and it doesn't even have to be ejaculation. Orgasm is arguably a much deeper concept than just ejaculation. But in that moment, if both people are attaining that same energetic reality together, for just one split second, there is this experience of Advaita. Tremendous feeling of oneness. And that's why all of our songs, arguably, one of the reasons why all of our songs and all of our music and all of our advertising, they're also obsessed with sexuality. Because it's the way that the mind in our current state of evolution conceives of Advaita. It's only through sex that one can attain Advaita, at least at this stage of understanding. So we're obsessed with it. Now, if it's attained, the problem is that if it's attained in this way, it can, for the right kind of person practicing the right kind of puja, like I have in mind, the Kaula yaga or something like that, it could be liberating. It could be a permanent experience of Advaita, but usually, in the rare case that two people are able to achieve this Advaita, it's like it comes and it goes. Haha, pardon the pun. And then back to separation. And then comes all the frustration and remorse and all like the next part of the love story that usually we don't hear about because the movie usually ends there. This quest for Advaita, it's fleeting when we try to get it through this way. In most cases, not always, can be successful in some cases, but usually we're left with this feeling of, oh no, now we're separate again. We'll try to solve for that with some pillow talk or something like that, or we'll get married, or try like all these things again, or give me 1 hour and then we'll try again. Or if you're under 30, then maybe 10 minutes or something. But you keep trying to get back to that Advaita and it keeps eluding us. Like that feeling of oneness. It comes very rarely, and when it does, it goes very quickly too. But look, it's a quest for Advaita. So you can say this whole world is this seeming separation between Shiva and Shakti, not to use these in their gendered terms, just the sense that there's this duality. But at the ultimate level of reality, Shiva and Shakti are described as being in perpetual sexual union. That's always the case. They're in Yamala or Sangata, which means their consciousness united with its self-reflexivity, meaning Advaita. But that Advaita is a union of what seems to be two, but never is actually two. That's unique to Tantric Advaita. In Advaita Vedanta, you just get Brahman only, you just get Shiva. But in this idea, you get Shakti, but they're not different. They're one and the same. Now think of this in terms of the devotee. The devotee is actually not different from God. The devotee is God, in one sense, in sexual union with herself. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna sometimes speaks in this Karta Bhaja, sort of mystical, erotic kind of way, where he says, through the practice of devotion, one develops a love body with love eyes and love ears and even love genitals. In 1882, one Thursday in August, he told this to M, and M laughed. M burst out laughing. What? Love genitals? And Sri Ramakrishna continued unannoyed, in that particular conversation. But this idea of like sexual union with God, intercourse with God, that who can understand those concepts? These are very high level ideas in devotion. Maybe Radha alone could understand it. Sri Ramakrishna alone could understand it. But notice, basically what I'm saying here is that the devotee is that capacity of God to enjoy herself. But notice, it's not different from God. That's why Sri Ramakrishna can have an absolute theism, which is absolutely non-dual and absolutely determinative, but is still able to experience himself as the devotee of God. He's still able to articulate a sense of somewhat being separate from God. Not really, but somewhat. And so therein lies Sri Ramakrishna's entire bhava, as you can see it in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He had so many bhavas. He was Bhava Raja. He was the king of all spiritual moods. And maybe on the weekdays when he was alone with his direct disciples, you might get more of an Advaitic Sri Ramakrishna. But generally, in the Gospel, when we meet him on weekends, through the pen of M, we find him a devotee par excellence, who feels himself to be the chariot and mother to be the driver. He feels himself to be the machine and mother is the operator. He can only do as mother makes him do. He can only speak as mother makes him speak. So that's what he calls jīvanmukti. The jīvanmukta, the liberated individual, has attained freedom by recognizing his complete helplessness. Everything that I do, my mother alone does through me. I cannot do anything. So not even a leaf moves except by the will of the Divine Mother. This seems to be Sri Ramakrishna's most prevalent bhava of being Ma's child, Ma's servant, like that. And he would say, like anytime you're outside of samadhi, the only time when there's no ego and the ego is fully attenuated, arguably, is this mystical state of meditation called nirvikalpa samadhi. There you don't experience the ego. But outside of nirvikalpa samadhi, Sri Ramakrishna would say, the ego springs up again, who knows from where. And he compares it to a particular tree. If you cut this tree, sooner or later you'll find more shoots have come up. And no matter how many times you cut it, more and more shoots come up. That's why I don't believe anybody who's told me that they've had an ego death. Because that was only true while you were having the ego death. Again, I believe you. I believe that you did 5 MEO DMT, or you did 5 grams of mushrooms, or you had a meditative experience. I believe you that in that moment, there was no ego, and you experienced that. I believe you. But I don't believe you now. Because now, outside of that experience, you're claiming to me that you have transcended the ego. But it's you who are saying that. You who are the ego, who feels themselves to be the one who had the experience of ego death, now you are reporting to me that you are egoless. How could that be? You couldn't even speak if there was not an experience of ego. You know what ego is? Ahankara? It's Shakti. Ahankara is a kind of Shakti identifying with the body and the mind. If this didn't happen, you'll get a miscarriage. Say the baby is forming in the fetus. By the time you get to 7 months, that Ahankara Shakti has firmly identified with the body and mind. That's why even if the child is born premature, typically from 7 to 9 months, the fella is going to be okay. Because the Ahankara Shakti has enough of a grasp on the fetus. You see the logic here? If it doesn't have a grasp on the fetus, like maybe before 7 months or something, if that baby comes out, it'll just be a fetus. The Ahankara Shakti hasn't identified with it yet. It's still absorbed in the Advaitic plane, meaning that jiva is absorbed in the absolute and doesn't feel that particular fetus. It doesn't feel that particular body and mind. And that's why it's a stillborn or a miscarriage or something like that. That's the way the yogis describe things like this. But if that Ahankara Shakti is established, if it's identified with the body and mind, then alone can it be an individual that can be born through a womb. Then alone can it grow. In fact, actually, even in the very beginning, unless there's some identification, there won't be this proliferation of cells. Like you won't get a zygote, like a blastocyte. Like none of that will happen actually. If there's an insemination of like the ovum and and sperm, if there's the right karma and the right jiva comes there, there has to be some identification with that moment so that there will be a proliferation of these cells. But it's possible that even then there's not enough of a hold for that person to come into the world. And you'll see this in some yogis. When they go into a meditative state, they won't be able to speak. They won't be able to move. In fact, this is true of some people who like drink too much or do too much drugs or something. Their Ahankara Shakti becomes disambiguated from the body and mind because it's become identified with something else. So they become like boneless. They can't move. They can't speak. If you are speaking, if you are moving, it's because there's some ego. In other words, there's some Ahankara Shakti, some identification with the mind and body. So if you are reporting to me that you had an ego death, you're right. You might have had an ego death, but right now you have an ego. Because if you didn't, and again, I'm not using ego in the pejorative sense here, I'm using it in the technical sense. If you didn't, you would not be able to speak. You would not be able to remember. You would not be able to move. You would not be able to make this Instagram post. Do you see? That's why Sri Ramakrishna's point is so profound. Yeah, if you are in samādhi, nirvikalpa samādhi, then maybe the ego is gone. But the moment you come out, it crops back up. No one knows from where. That's his joke. Like the shoots of this particular tree that keeps coming up no matter how many times you cut it down. So in some cases, people voluntarily do this. According to Sri Ramakrishna, they retain the ego of knowledge, like Sri Shankara, or they retain the ego of devotion, like Sri Chaitanya, in order to teach people and inspire people. So that's possible. That's possible that a person voluntarily, like a bodhisattva or someone, voluntarily keeps their ego after samadhi in order to be able to move and speak and interact and tell other people what's behind the wall. That's also possible. But it's also possible that it just shows up, like inadvertently, like we learn in the jīvanmukti videha, that sometimes, you just come out of samadhi. If you're so lucky to experience samadhi, then you might have experienced an egoless state. But if you come out of it, you'll be back to having the ego. So then Sri Ramakrishna's teaching is very profound. As long as there's this feeling of I am this body or I am this mind, it would be hypocritical to say I am Brahman. Because although that's absolutely true, it's not the reality that I feel in this moment, outside of nirvikalpa samadhi. So it's almost as if the statement I am Brahman is only kosher in nirvikalpa samadhi, the way that monopoly money only works while you're playing Monopoly. Do you see? If you go to the grocery store and you offer your monopoly money and you try to buy some Cocoa Puffs or something, they'll laugh at you. They'll be like, this is cute, but you need actual money. In other words, what's currency in one reality is not necessarily currency in another reality. This point is very important. Do we understand this point? That different things can be true relative to the plane in which they are experienced. So in the absolute, meaning in the experience of nirvikalpa samadhi, one attains Brahma Jnana, which is the understanding that I am Brahman, aham brahmasmi. But in that state, that's true. But the moment you come out of that state, you can remember that truth, but then you're back in the domain of Shakti. In other words, you're back to the experience of the body and mind. In other words, the experience of the ego. In that sense, it won't do to use your monopoly money. It won't do to say, I am Brahman or that, because that statement then would be duplicitous. It would be hypocritical. It was true in the absolute, but now it's only true as a memory or only true as an absolute statement, but it's not actually how you feel. And so then a lot of hypocrisy can arise, where I'm saying I'm Brahman, yet I feel myself to be this body and mind, and I'm acting like this body and mind. So what do? Sri Ramakrishna's advice is very simple. He says, if there should even be an ego at all, and of course there naturally will be outside of samadhi, then make the rascal God's servant. That kind of ego doesn't harm anybody. So the ego of I am God's servant or I am God's devotee is the ripe ego. Paka Ami. By Ami means I am. So the ripe I am, or the right I am, rather, the best I am that you can have while being a person is the I am a devotee feeling, or I am a servant of God feeling. So in one sense, what Sri Ramakrishna is offering is a sadhana. He's saying that insofar as you identify as a person, feel that you are primarily a devotee of God. Don't say, oh, I'm a father, or I am a mother, or I am a husband, or I am a wife, or I am a child, or I am a janitor, or I am an astrophysicist. No, all of those are harmful. But if you say, I am God's devotee, I am God's servant, I am God's child, that's fine. So this is offered as a sadhana, right? But it's not just that. It's also offered as the ultimate nature of reality. So, or rather, the ultimate state of realization. So at a certain point, when a person attains full spiritual maturity, anytime they are outside of samadhi, they will identify as a devotee. Because in samadhi, they are Brahman. They know that. They know that they are one with reality. But outside of samadhi, they express themselves as a perfect dualist, as a perfect bhakta. They never forget that I am one with Kālī. But in actuality, when you see them moving about in the world, you see that they're praying, they're talking to Kālī. So although Sri Ramakrishna had an Advaitic approach to God, although he believed in God as an absolute theistic principle, he still felt himself to be God's devotee, which doesn't compromise Advaita at all for the reasons aforementioned. And he reacted and behaved as a devotee. So he spoke to God, he saw God, he confided in God, he took refuge in God, and he recognized God as the sole doer. So this is Sri Ramakrishna's teaching that God alone is the doer. I am ultimately God, but outside of samadhi, it's better to feel like God's devotee. And this is very important, not even a leaf moves by God's will. And yet, and this is the nuance of what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, and yet, by her sweet will, she puts in people a feeling of free will so that they can have a conscience and do the right thing, or like learn, or like play a game or something. So the nuance of Sri Ramakrishna's view on determinism and free will cannot be overstated. He's saying that absolutely, actually, there's no free will. But you cannot deny that there appears to be a feeling of free will. We all feel like we are the ones who chose the chocolate cereal at the grocery store. We all feel like we are choosing to go here as opposed to go there. Nobody can deny that feeling. And according to Sri Ramakrishna, that's part of God's play. She creates, as it were, conjures up this feeling that I am an agent. So it's almost like in my spiritual immaturity, I take that feeling to be real and I act as if I am the doer. And thank God for it, because that's the way we progress in life. Otherwise we would be making excuses for ourselves. We might not act. We might not take responsibility for our lives. Thank God we all feel like the doer. And it's by God's grace that we do, but we aren't. We aren't actually the doer. And so for this, you can look to Sapolsky and his wonderful book Determined or something like that. You can see that even at this level, God aside, it's an illusion. Benjamin Lippitt studies, for instance, on a neurological, neurochemical, neuroscientific level, it's clear that like there's a biological determinism. From a psychological point of view, there's a psychological determinism. From a physical point of view, even there's a physical determinism. So whether it's physics or biology or psychology, they all seem to conclude that free will is an illusion. We can't deny that we feel it, but just because we feel it doesn't mean it's there. So according to Sri Ramakrishna, by God's grace, by her will, we feel like we can act. But then through sadhana, which we voluntarily take up as a result of our free will, through sadhana, we learn better. We mature and we realize, actually, it was her all along. She's been pulling the strings. I'm just her sock puppet. And so there is no free will. According to Sri Ramakrishna, absolutely speaking, there's no free will. Also, it's so good to see you, Red. Hello. Jai. So there's no free will at all, but there is a feeling of free will. Right? There's a feeling. And God, according to Sri Ramakrishna, conjures up that feeling. But absolutely, ultimately, there's no free will. Okay? So that's why Sri Ramakrishna's views on free will are contingent upon his theism and his absolute theism. And this is what I was trying to explain in the previous lecture called Is There Free Will? There isn't. And it takes a lot of spiritual maturity to actually live that way. Because like short of that realization, you won't feel this to be true. Like you can say it, oh, there's no free will, but you will still feel like you are walking and you are talking. In other words, you will still feel frightened of the world. It'll still feel like things can happen that are outside of my control, that are random, that are problematic. It might still feel like I can make a mistake, or it might still feel like I have something to gain or something to lose. Basically, you know that you are in the driver's seat if you have a feeling of fear and desire, or if you have a feeling of attachment to outcome, you know? Now, there's a big difference between surrender and giving up. So arguably, if I give up, I can't give up, because even if I give up, something will happen where I'll still act. Because say I'm writing a book, and in the process of writing the book, I feel like, oh, it's just too much. I'm so overwhelmed, and I give up. That feeling of being the doer won't go away. I'll still feel like the doer who maybe is now not writing a book, but is now like eating a tub of ice cream and watching a movie, some 4 director's cuts of Lord of the Rings or something, like extended edition Lord of the Rings, eating the. So I'm still the doer. So I can give up writing the book, but I won't give up being the doer. So giving up is not what I'm talking about here. That's the tamas of this idea. The rajas is like, no, do something. I am the doer. I feel like the doer. I might as well act like the doer. Let me write that book. Let me do my sadhana, etc. Now, if you live like this, honestly and truly, meaning through rajas, you do all the things that you feel like you need to do, then maybe through sadhana, you attain this state of sattva where you realize in that clarity, in that lucidity of sattva, using some Sankhya terms here, you realize, oh my God, God's been pulling the strings all along. I'm just a sock puppet. There's actually no free will. Never has been, never will be. There was an episode of New Girl where she's talking to somebody and he says, everything happens for a reason. And that reason is random chance. So like everything feels like random actually in the universe until God's presence is perceived. Anya san vyaptito nanyaha. Remember the verse said that God is transcendent but immanent by virtue of pervasion. So once we realize God through sadhana, or in other words, once we have an intuition of God, what to say of realizing God, once we have an intuition of God's presence, then also comes surrender, the feeling like, oh my God, I can't do anything actually. God alone is doing everything, and I have nothing to gain and nothing to lose because everything that happens will be happening by God's will, not my will. And what I do and what I say in the moment will be determined by God. Why should I worry about it? I don't have to feel anxiety about what the right action is. Since I'm only a puppet, in that moment, the body will move, the mouth will move, the mind will move, and action will spontaneously occur along the lines of pratibha, intuition, because it belongs to God. And so therefore, God will do her own puja. God will do her own lecture. God will do her own freedom fighting, or whatever it is that that particular individual is doing in the universe. They don't feel attached anymore because inwardly they understand, I am but a machine, God is the operator. I am the carriage, God is the driver. I cannot of my own self do anything. Everything I do, God does through me. Everything I say, God says through me. This is the attitude to be cultivated, or to be realized, or to be recognized. There is no free will whatsoever, and the sooner we recognize that, the sooner we will be free. Here's the paradox. Recognizing that I am not free to do anything, that I cannot do anything, recognizing that is synonymous with freedom. Because the only freedom is God's freedom. And although I am essentially God, I feel myself anytime I'm not in nirvikalpa samadhi to be God's devotee. So if we're going to be honest about how it feels to be outside of nirvikalpa samadhi. Okay, now, this is where it gets interesting. I want to offer 4 stories of Swami Vivekananda in closing. Because remember, the opening kind of dilemma that I presented at the start of the talk was this. Swatantriya is the essence of Shakti. There is no Kālī without limitlessness, aparicheda, and Advaita. Kālī is essentially limitless non-duality, which means she is free. So she is Swatantriya, she is free. Now I am Kālī. The next claim of Advaita is that whether it's a theistic claim or a Advaita Vedanta claim, it's still you still come to the same conclusion. God alone exists, or the absolute alone exists. If we define the absolute as free, and if I myself am the absolute, then I am free actually. But I just now said that I am not. How can I be free when mother alone is doing everything? But if I am mother and if mother is free, then I should be free. So herein lies the dilemma, the paradox. Am I free or am I not? So you'll see in the Swatantriya Vada, a great emphasis is placed on your freedom, on your kartritva. But I want to nuance that, because that freedom is actually very unlike what we think. Most of us, by freedom, what we mean by freedom is the freedom to be a slave to our impulses. Have you noticed? Like when I say I'm free, so I have a day off. What's going to happen? I'm just going to do whatever my addictions tell me to do. I'm going to smoke my cigarettes. I'm going to watch my TV. I'm going to, whatever it is that you have a problem with, you'll just do that and you'll call it freedom. So you can gain political freedom from your governments. You can gain freedom in your schedule by quitting your job or like taking a week off. But don't think that actually gives you any freedom. It just gives you space to be a slave to your patterns. You see, freedom is very different. What we think is freedom is action, but usually that action is determined by some psychological, physical, or biological force. So therefore, Sri Ramakrishna's disciple Swami Vivekananda made a very interesting case. He said free will is a contradiction in terms. If you're free, you wouldn't will, and if you will, you aren't free. Because if I go to the kitchen and make a sandwich, I cannot do that in freedom. The only reason I did that is because I was hungry. And so my hunger is a biological cause whose effect is me getting up and going into the kitchen, or really me crying out to Vijaya and asking for food. But in either case, the action of asking for food is caused by my hunger, which is caused by biology. Like some, what gland is it? There's some ghrelin is secreted, and then the hypothalamus or something. Like there's some process where the what is it? There's a part of the brain that like picks up on ghrelin and understands that I'm hungry like that. So there's series of hormonal reactions. So much of what we say and do is hormonal anyway. Like it's a very esoteric process of what glands are secreting what at what time, resulting in how we feel, which then results in what we do and what we say. Yeah, it's the hypothalamus, right? So like that's happening. This hypothalamus ghrelin secretion reaction is going on. And then I think I'm so free. I say, "Oh, I'm in my freedom. I have a day off. I'm so free. I'm just gonna walk into the kitchen in my underwear and I'm gonna chop up some cucumbers and I'm gonna put lime all over it. I'm gonna take the regular tahini and then I'm gonna take the habanero tahini and put that on. And then I'm gonna splash some olive oil. That's what I did last night. And then I'm gonna sprinkle even more lime on top of it because you want the tahini dust to like be properly, and then once I make all of that, I'm going to eat it with great relish. I'm going to eat my spicy, limey cucumbers. Then when I get to the end of all of these cucumbers, I'm going to have this tahini lemon juice left over, where it's just like pure lemon and pure hypertension, pure salt and pure olive oil. And I'm going to drink that, and it's going to be wonderful. I'm going to lift it to my lips like a skull bowl, and like Vajra Yogini, I'm going to drink it with great joy. And I think all of this is happening in freedom. In truth, in truth, it was ghrelin. It was the hypothalamus response. It was hunger that impelled me to do all of this. And it was my conditioning, that made me choose the cucumber. I don't like putting tahini on watermelon. It's like just too watery and it's too sweet. And I think the sweet against the salty and sour, I don't like it. I like the cucumber, especially the small Persian cucumber, because it has no like real flavor of its own. It's like an inoffensive, crunchy thing that works as a perfect delivery system for my salt and chili. That's all I want. I want the salt and chili. I don't really care for the vegetable. And the watermelon or the mango, which is I know the traditional choice for the tahini, Jai Ma Durga Durga, is just too like it has too much presence. The watermelon and the mango, it makes itself known too much. So I don't enjoy it. Why should Kali enjoy you if there you are? So prevalent when all she wants is a delivery system for her spice. So I think that's the idea that like I don't actually express my freedom when I chop up cucumbers and put lemon and tahini on it and eat it. I'm just an effect in a series of cause and effects that go back to my childhood, to the first time I had this cucumber snack. Bye day. Durga Durga. And once I remember we went to Bhaskar Babu came and visited from San Francisco. It was Bhaskar and Zainji, and we were all in the car. And Bhaskar, he had never before tasted this concoction of tahini and lemon. And so we stopped by a stand on the side of the road. The real masters. There's like the Mexican fruit stand, and they're like geniuses, like chop it up, and it's wonderful. So I gave Bhaskar Babu to try it for the first time with the chamoy and everything. And then he ate it, and I was sitting in the back of the car, and I remember he was sitting in the front, and then he turned and looked at me, and his eyes were wide open. He's like, "It's like crack." It's so tasty. But like notice that could have happened to me at some point in my life. I could have tried this and I was like, oh, it's like crack. It's so good. And then that created an association. Maybe it was just a beautiful day. Like it was a beautiful day on the PCH, the Pacific Coast Highway. The sky was vast and cloudless and the sun, and we're just coming from a temple. Bye, Durga Durga. I'm coming from a temple, and like I'm just in this state of joy, and then I eat this thing, and now there's an association. I'm happy, I'm eating this thing makes me happy, this thing is good. And therefore now, years later, I'm walking to my kitchen to go chop up some cucumbers. Like you notice this whole thing is so determined. So in what sense is willing free? In no sense. According to Swami Vivekananda, if I'm willing, it's because I'm acting on impulse, I'm an effect. But if I'm free, I won't will. So free will is a contradiction in terms, you see. So now there's another kind of willing, that Swamiji is not talking about here, that we're bringing up in the context of the Bhagavad Gita. It's called the nishkama karma, the action, which is not a cause, it's not caused action. It's not a conditioned action. See, if I'm acting for some outcome, then it's conditioned. It's at least conditioned by the desire for that outcome or the desire to avoid a particular outcome. So that's a conditioned act. But if I'm not acting because I want something, if I'm just acting just to act, for its own sake, with no thought of its result, then that can be called expression, not necessarily a causal, determined action, but an action from freedom, svatantriya. So the Bhagavad Gita is really a svatantriya shastra, a doctrine of how to attain absolute freedom in life by just doing things for their own sake, according to my own self-expression. The swadharma of the rose is to be a rose. For you, it might be to write a book or to play rock and roll in a band or to play jazz music or to win a Nobel Prize for astrophysics, whatever it is, that's just going to happen. And that's an expression of your freedom. So that kind of action we say is the Divine Mother acting through us, because almost everybody who acts in this way, in this nishkama karma svatantriya way, everyone will say, oh, it just happened. It happened through me. I could never of my own will done it. It was music itself that did it or something, you know. They always feel a kind of humility because they know that it's just happening through them. So the point I want to make here is that Swami Vivekananda defined free will as a contradiction in terms. See, freedom is freedom of the self, which has no action whatsoever. He's thinking from an Advaitic point of view, Advaita Vedanta point of view, sorry. But from an Advaita Tantra point of view, you can say, no, freedom actually is the freedom to will, but not will in a caused way, in a conditioned way, but to will as a matter of self-expression. So notice Swami Vivekananda was incredibly active. Sri Ramakrishna was incredibly active, but both of them felt like they could of themselves do nothing. So now I want to come to those 4 stories I mentioned earlier, 4 episodes in the life of Swami Vivekananda that reveals his inner attitude, which tallies perfectly with his master Sri Ramakrishna's definition of enlightenment. And then I want to close about with this idea, what can we do about this? How can we cash in on this teaching? So the first story, what is that, Ruth? What are you holding there? Hold on, what is it? Show it again. Oh, you made it! Oh my God! Gimme! Is it awesome? Look, you could use way more tahini on that. Like way more. Like just go ham. Yeah, finish it. Like you have a nice big tray. It's gotta have a lot of tahini. Like then it's like whoa, then it's like just such an explosion. Yeah, share with the class, Shraddha Devi is saying. It's my favorite thing, this cucumber with the tahini and the lemon. So much so that somebody actually got it for me as a birthday present. Like I outside the temple, Apurva ji was standing there with tahini and he gave it to me, like the bottle of tahini. Anyway, this lecture brought to you by. It's so funny, you know, every day I get like 20 emails from all, like at least 20 from all these like random brands. And they want me to like show this keychain or hold this bottle or like wear this thing and like sell their product essentially. You know, like that's the thing. Everyone is always like Temu, for instance. Temu reached out and they were like, let's collaborate, sell this product every single day, you know. And I've never responded to, like, I don't respond to any of these emails. And then they send more emails. You know, I never respond to them. I have never actually like done a product placement thing, like not really. So it's funny because then I'm always mentioning products like this, like the tahini, like I'm like, damn, you guys, like it's just the wrong products. Like if tahini were to reach out, like I'm always talking about you guys, or like Ayurvedic copper water bottles or something. Anyway. So notice this paradox. We have this Svatantriya Shakti, which is, remember, aparicheda, limitlessness, is synonymous with Advaita, because if there is a limit, remember, according to the Vedanta Sara, this is very important to remember. Paricheda, limitation, is defined as the existence of something else. Where one thing ends and another thing begins, that's limitation. So if there's Advaita, there's also aparicheda, unavachinna, meaning there's no limitation. There's no second other than me to limit me. So if I am pure non-dual consciousness, that consciousness is Advaita, it's aparicheda, which means it's Svatantriya, it's free. Because freedom is defined also as being limitless. But more importantly, in this tradition, in Tantric non-duality, freedom is defined as Kartritva, which seems to juxtapose Swamiji's statement about free will as a contradiction in terms. Kartritva means this world, this expression. So the paradox here is that I am essentially Kālī, therefore I should be free. Yet, the experience of being in this body-mind is the experience of being wholly surrendered, like more importantly, wholly dependent and wholly determined by Kali. Does that not set up a duality? No, it doesn't. And that's the burden of this lecture to prove. So hopefully we've already proved it. For those who are reasoning and seeing carefully, you'll see that we've already proved it in the question of Sri Ramakrishna feeling himself to be both the devotee and God, with reference to Prakasha and Vimarsha in hearing simultaneously in the sexual union of Shiva and Shakti. So already the answer is given, albeit somewhat obliquely. But now let's try to answer more directly. So, Swami Vivekananda, let's come to these 4 stories that prove his inner attitude was this, tallying with his master's sense of freedom. Remember, Sri Ramakrishna in that same conversation with M, where he's talking about the love genitals and like sexual union of the Brahman, he says, when the drunkard drinks enough liquor, then he says, "Verily I am Kali." Or when the gopi is intoxicated with her Mahabhava, then she says, "I am Krishna." So Sri Ramakrishna's logic is that as long as I'm feeling myself to be the body and mind, I relate to God as God's servant or God's friend or God's child or something like that, or God's parent or something like that. And through the ecstasy of intense love, that duality is obliterated. It's like staring into a fire. When you turn away, everything seems to be on fire. Or it's like a person with jaundice. They see everything as yellow. Like that, when you love God, when you really obsessively love your Ishta. And you guys, this is the TLDR of everything. Have an Ishta, one Ishta, have a mantra, and then chant that mantra. And the more you chant that mantra, the more obsessed you'll become with your Ishta. Do the pujas, do the homas, chant the mantras, sing the names and glories of your Ishta, sing the Kālī Sahasranam every single day, or at least Saturdays or new moons or something. Like just obsessively do everything in your power to think about your Ishta. And through that, you get this positive feedback loop where you, sooner or later, through your bhakti practices, Gauni bhakti, Vaidhi bhakti practices, you become obsessed with your Ishta. And then according to Sri Ramakrishna, this bhakti, this obsession with your Ishta culminates in Advaita. You will get this sense that because I'm obsessed, I can only see that. I only think of that. So everyone is that. Everything is that. Oh my God, I also am that. So verily I am Kali is a statement that a drunkard makes. Drunk on what? On the wine of devotion, the intoxication of Mahabhava, on chanting the name. Like that drunkenness, that intoxication leads to Advaita. So that's a kind of claim from the sadhana point of view. That you get Advaita through japa, through puja, through bhakti in this way, because you become absorbed and like a moth into the flame, you forget about yourself. In other words, the ahankara shakti, which I was talking about earlier, ceases its identification with the body and mind and instead identifies with the ishta. So now the ahankara shakti, which otherwise flows into actions in the world, is indrawn. So this is what it means by Ma Kali having sex in the reverse position. Mahakalena cha samam viparita rataturam. This idea in the Dhyana shloka is that Ma Kali is on top. As somebody once said, reverse cowgirl. What's going on with the reversal here? It's a simple idea about prana. The prana flows outwards. And that's like regular sex. That's missionary, boring. But here the idea is that the prana flows in the opposite direction. Ma's on top, which means instead of the ahankara shakti identifying with the body and mind and acting in the world, it's reversed. It now, that ahankara shakti, which is Ma, identifies with Shiva and the Sahasrara, and then one attains samādhi. So in that union of Shiva and Shakti, then one is Kali. But it comes through identifying with the deity by constantly thinking of the deity, meditating on the deity. Today, I sat in a cafe for some hours. I looked and saw how many dogs came into the cafe. It was in Santa Monica, literally Dogtown. They call that place Dogtown, like between Venice Beach and Santa Monica. There's so many dogs. So I was just watching these dogs one by one come into the cafe, and I was comparing them to their owners. And in almost every case, not every case, there's a striking resemblance. Maybe it's like a superimposition or something. But because they're always thinking about their dogs, doting on their dogs, feeding their dogs, doing japa to their dogs all the time, saying the dog's name over and over and over. Of course, they look like their dogs. Now, instead of doing that, why don't you become, you can do that, that's wonderful. I'm very fond of dogs, that's wonderful. But why don't you be the dog of Ma Kali? And if you are the dog of Ma Kali, then you're always just thinking like a dog, thinking of the owner, thinking of Ma Kali, then or whoever you like, Bhairava or Shiva or whatever, and then Krishna, whatever, and then you become that. One way you can tell you're making progress in sadhana is that you tend to resemble your Ishta more and more, inadvertently, just because you're thinking about her or it all the time. So, then what's happening is actually your Ahankara Shakti is loosening itself from the body and starting to flow into the Ishta. This is the mechanics of sadhana. And then there's a steady increase of intoxication. You become drunk, mad, filled with the obsession of God. And then you say, Verily am I Kali. So Advaita seems to be synonymous here with intense devotion, prema, or obsession with God. Hopefully you can see the mechanics. This isn't just an empty claim to try to harmonize jnana or bhakti or something. This is a practical application of japa, of puja, in order to attain real Advaita, not conceptual Advaita, but the real Advaita of nirvikalpa samadhi. Already, I'm making a yogic claim about Advaita. I'm saying all this Advaita is just talk until you have nirvikalpa samadhi. Brahma jnana is only valid in that state. Outside of that state, you might have a memory of Brahma jnana, which, like a memory of a psychedelic trip, might help you and might inform your experience. But outside of nirvikalpa samadhi, cultivating intense devotion is the way, and it creates a feedback loop. Okay, so now we have this idea from Sri Ramakrishna. Let's see it in Swamiji. 4 episodes. Episode number 1, Swami Vivekananda, in the beginning, despised Kālī. This is a very important detail in the story and he, in his own words, hated her ways. He said, "How I used to hate her and her ways." And he was very put off by Sri Ramakrishna's Kālī worship. He said to Sister Nivedita these exact words. I used to think of him as a brain-sick baby, referring to Sri Ramakrishna and his constant visions of Ma Kālī. So he rejected the whole thing. He rejected the idea that God can be worshipped in an image. He obviously rejected Kālī, which is one of the most controversial images in the Hindu pantheon. And he rejected the sentimentality and the eccentricity of mystical visions. He just denied that whole thing. But he loved Ramakrishna. And he said that to Sister Nivedita. He said, I couldn't help but love him. He bound me to him with his love. So Swami Vivekananda has this kind of cognitive dissonance right now. He loves Ramakrishna. He can see absolute purity and absolute spiritual maturity in Ramakrishna, but he couldn't reconcile that with all this like Kali worship and whatnot. Keshab Chandra Sen had a similar problem. But like how do you in your own mind come to terms with the fact that this is the holiest person you've ever met, and yet he's interested in and doing all the things that you consider to be the most spiritually immature kinds of things? These heathen superstitions. And remember, Swami Vivekananda, when he was Narendranath, signed a pledge with the Brahmo Samaj. It's there in writing. He signed a pledge that he would never worship gods and goddesses in an image. The Brahmo Samaj were manifestly against this kind of Hinduism. They were a reform movement. So Swamiji was not into Kali, but something happened. And this is where I get to my favorite part of the lecture, the problem of evil, horror, tragedy, pain, war. This is the splash zone. This is where a Kali devotee is most comfortable talking, you can imagine. So here's where it gets fun. Scary also. And I'll read you a scary poem at the end of all of this to really drive home this point. Today is Kālashtami, of course. And I have not turned on any lights yet, just a few candles and a little bit of light. So good, it's not nice and spooky. We can give you a nice taste of this darker side of Kali. So something happened to Swamiji, which of course is symbolic of the problem of evil. You see, he was very rich. He had access to the best that life had to offer in Kolkata at that time. He was part of one of the richest families in Kolkata, the Datta family. And disaster struck, like his father suddenly died, and his father had racked up quite a big debt. And suddenly, overnight, the family was plunged into poverty. And he had to look after, as the eldest child, he had to look after his mother and his siblings, his younger brother, his younger sister. They were all starving because overnight, relatives who were beneficiaries of his father's kindness now came like wolves, all trying to take pieces of the property and take money from the family. So he was constantly under the barrage of lawsuits and of starvation, literal starvation. And Swamiji, it's like a Michael Jordan story getting cut from his basketball team. Swamiji couldn't get a job. I mean, like, can you imagine a person like that? So powerful, so intelligent, the creme de la creme of the youth of Kolkata at the time. He couldn't get a job. He would go from office to office and everyone was turning him down. It was a very hard time for him. He lost his father suddenly. His family was destitute. He was starving. He was struggling with the weight and responsibility of taking care of his mother and his children, the other children in the household. His friends had basically deserted him, and he was starting to question whether or not God exists. He was in real time wrestling with the problem of evil. And this whole time, he kept visiting Sri Ramakrishna. Now he's going through a lot, like some are claiming that he's drinking or visiting brothels. Those claims weren't true, but they came from the fact that he would constantly denigrate God. Whenever he was in the presence of devotees, he would scold them for singing devotional songs, or he would sarcastically and sardonically denigrate God. So people thought, oh my God, he's becoming an atheist. He's absolutely lost it, stuff like that. And they would spread rumors about him that he was drinking and drugging and just kind of a lost cause. And so he was very troubled in this time. But he kept visiting Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna would hear nothing of these rumors. He had absolute faith in Swamiji, and that seemed to reassure Swamiji, and it seemed to irresistibly attract Swamiji, because here was somebody who loved him unconditionally, who wouldn't believe all of these rumors about him. And of course, here was someone who was absolutely peaceful, in whose presence he got some respite from the horror of his life. Now, and this is very interesting, in one conversation with another devotee, with Hazra, Sri Ramakrishna says, Swamiji, I think it's Hazra, he says, Swamiji is suffering now because he doesn't accept Kālī. It's a really remarkable point. It's like, there's a cause for Swamiji's suffering. He's suffering now because he doesn't accept Kālī. He's in the jurisdiction of Kālī, and yet he denies Kālī. He won't accept her. That's why he's suffering. What can I do to help him? He won't accept Kālī. So this is a very sobering thought. Swami Mahayoganandaji pointed out yesterday in the talk. He was saying, like, it's kind of sobering to think that even if an avatara is praying on your behalf, even if Kālī is willing to help you, if you aren't willing to be helped, in other words, if you aren't willing to accept the sovereign mother of the universe, you cannot be helped. It's almost like saying you can drag the horse to the water, but if it refuses to drink, what can you do? And so Sri Ramakrishna and the Divine Mother Kālī are dragging Swamiji to the water, but he just won't stick his tongue out and be refreshed. He just cannot accept Kālī. How I used to hate her and her ways, he said. Okay, now something important happens. Driven to the extreme of suffering, he's desperate. He comes to Sri Ramakrishna and asks Sri Ramakrishna to interject on his behalf. Like, Sri Ramakrishna talks to the Divine Mother. Now he's desperate enough to ask Sri Ramakrishna to talk to the Divine Mother for his own sake. Like, can you ask her for some money? And Sri Ramakrishna is like, why don't you ask her yourself? Remember, he doesn't believe in the Divine Mother. But he's so desperate now that he's willing to take his chance with Sri Ramakrishna interceding. Sri Ramakrishna said, no, it's Tuesday. And not only is it Tuesday, it's nighttime. It's a perfect time to go and see the Divine Mother and to ask her yourself. And now, usually he would have a problem with this, but maybe driven by his poverty, driven by his suffering, but especially by his master's grace, he started to feel like there's some truth to this. He started to believe that tonight he would get his answer. So the time was about 9 p.m. on a particular Tuesday, and Swami Vivekananda was sent to the temple at Dakshineshwar. Many of you have been. That same image is still there. There's a different throne, though. You can see the old throne is in a side room, but now the same image is still there. So Swami Vivekananda, he went to see her, and he claimed that on his way to the Garbhagriha, he was drunk. On his way to see the image, he started to sway and stagger and feel a kind of intoxication. Then when he walked into the temple, just like I can imagine Totapuri way back when, an Advaitin, not really an Advaitin, but a person who rejects God in this form. For the first time, he was confronted with the reality of the image. So he saw that it wasn't an image at all. It was a living, breathing presence. The Divine Mother was there in all her splendor. And so he was very reticent about what actually happened, but he led on this much. He said to Sister Nivedita about this incident later, that he felt such love that he prayed for bhakti, for jnana, for vairagya, for devotion, for knowledge, for renunciation, but he was unable to ask for the money. That's an interesting thing. The thought didn't even cross his mind. He forgot about his family. He forgot about his own plight. He couldn't ask for the thing that he had come to ask for. So he went back to Sri Ramakrishna and explained everything. Like, oh, I saw this. I had this vision. I had. And then Sri Ramakrishna stopped him and said, but did you ask for the money though? That's why you went. And he was like, no, I forgot all about it. And Sri Ramakrishna is like, there's still time. Go back there and ask for the money. This whole thing is because he needs money, remember. So he goes back to the Divine Mother. And remember, the Divine Mother can give anything. She's the one that dispenses both bhoga and yoga. So it's perfectly kosher to ask for money. So he goes back, and again, he's unable to ask for the money. He only asks for bhakti, jnana, vairagya, like that. He's just full of ecstasy, having this experience of the mother's living presence. So he comes back second time to Sri Ramakrishna and claims that he couldn't ask for the money. And Sri Ramakrishna really scolds him this time and says, one more time, go there and ask for the money. You can do it. So he goes back. And now he says to Sister Nivedita that he suddenly felt this deep shame. He's like, I'm in the presence of the supreme ruler of the universe. It's like going to a great king and asking for a few pumpkins or vegetables. He felt like these things that were real concerns to him, like really serious issues. They felt so trifling. Just imagine right now all the wars around you, all the horror in your societal life, in your personal life. Imagine a state of mind where all of that feels like a trifle to you. Such states of mind exist. And they only can be accessed when you're face to face with the author of all these tragedies. So he comes face to face with the Divine Mother, and he just cannot think to ask for money, for safety, for help for himself and for his family who he loves so dearly. Instead, he just cries and cries and cries and experiences great devotion. So he comes back to Sri Ramakrishna, but he needs the money, you see, so he's not one to let go. So he comes back to Sri Ramakrishna and he's like, look, this is your fault. I know this is all your Leela. By your will alone, all of this is happening. It's a profound statement. And he's unwilling to let Sri Ramakrishna go, and he's begging for this money. And Sri Ramakrishna is like, this kind of prayer will never come to my lips. I can never pray for such a thing. But then finally he relented. He relented. He said, fine, fine, fine. Your parents will never your mom and your family will never lack for coarse food and clothing. But then what Sri Ramakrishna said to Swamiji? It's interesting. He said, it appears that it's not in your destiny to enjoy worldly pleasure. It's not in your destiny to become luxurious. Mother can give that. She does give that to many people. She makes them kings and queens and great rulers. But Swamiji was meant to be an emperor in a different way. So there's the hand of destiny there. So that's an important turning point. And he says to Sister Nivedita that what happened there will go with me to my grave. He was very reticent about what actually happened. But here's what we can glean from a few of the fragments of what he said to Sister Nivedita. She alone records this. Apparently, he spoke to Kālī also. He didn't just see her. He spoke to her. And apparently, this is Swamiji's admission. Apparently, her words were, I will make a slave of you. Swamiji said those were her exact words. I will make a slave of you. And then he said, she saw her opportunity and she took it. So almost to say that he was down bad, he had lost his father, he was poor, he was desperate, and mother was willing to capitalize on that. She saw that there was a person who was finally willing to surrender totally to her. And in Swamiji's own words, she saw her opportunity and she took it. To do what? To make a slave of him. According to Swami Vivekananda, in this experience, Ma Kālī herself spoke and said, I will make a slave of you. That was what she wanted. And that's what she got. So Sri Ramakrishna was so happy. And you know how this story ends? It's so beautiful. Swamiji goes back to Sri Ramakrishna. He secures the coarse food and clothing for his family. But then he asked Sri Ramakrishna for a song. He asked to learn a song that he can sing to the Divine Mother Kālī. And Sri Ramakrishna teaches him this song, the one that goes like, Amar ma tvangi tara, tumi triguna dhara parat para ma tvangi Tara. Oh mother, you are my very own mother, Tara, the savioress. You are the holder of the three gunas, and yet you are transcendent. See, same idea, immanent yet transcendent. Tumi jalle, tumi sthale, tumi adyamule goma. You are the water, you are the earth, you are the root of all reality. So an Advaitic claim. Tumi Shantha, Tumi Gayatri, Tumi Jagodhatri Goma, Ma Tangi Tara. It's Rag Bhairavi, one of course, Ma's favorite melodies. And he goes to the temple having learned the song, and he sings this song all night. So just look at what the expression is. It's singing, it's dancing, it's expressing love. All night long, Swamiji is just in the temple singing this one song, the same song over and over and over and over and over and over to the Divine Mother. Maybe with a tanpura, who knows? Maybe just a cappella. But anyway, he sang and he sang and he sang. It was all night. And then, of course, he slept through the day. So he was sleeping in the room. And Sri Ramakrishna was there in the room. He was sleeping. And Vaikuntanath comes. And Sri Ramakrishna, with great delight, says, see, Narendranath has finally accepted the Divine Mother Kālī. Sri Ramakrishna was so happy. This was Narendranath's conversion. He was converted, as it were. He had a religious experience. So now he accepts Kālī. Okay, that's the first incident. The second incident is very interesting. Sri Ramakrishna is about to die 2 or 3 days before he kicks his mortal coil. 1886, August. He calls Swamiji to the room. At that time, they're all in the Kaushapur garden house, fervently doing spiritual practices and taking care of the master. So it's just the direct disciples and some householders who are there in the room, in the house. So one day, Sri Ramakrishna, 2 or 3 days before he kicks the body, calls to him Swami Vivekananda, young Narendranath. So Narendranath enters the room and comes to the side of the bed, and then something occurs. Like Sri Ramakrishna transfers something to Narendranath, and he's unconscious. And when he comes to, he sees that Sri Ramakrishna is crying. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, today I have become a fakir because I have given you all the spiritual power, something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. But then Swamiji said he felt like a kind of electricity enter into him, a kind of energy. A transmission occurred where all of Sri Ramakrishna went into Swamiji. Okay. Now, years later, just note this instant, it happened. And Sri Ramakrishna said, with this power, you will do great work. So, of course, Swamiji, in just such a short time, did all of this. If you've ever been to any yoga studio in America, you have Swami Vivekananda to thank. I stentorianly stand by these words. There would be no Eastern spirituality in America. There would be no Yogananda Paramahansa. There would be no Yogi Bhajan. There would be no Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. There would be no Woodstock Yogi, Satchidananda Yogi. There would be none of these people. There would be no Osho, nothing. There would be no Indian spirituality in India if that foundation was not laid painstakingly by Swami Vivekananda. And what work it was. He really and then also I'm so passionate about this point, but everything else that came after him seemed so derivative. All the ideas or the phrasing, the way that these spiritual ideas were delivered, they were all modeled after Swami Vivekananda. All the yogis and gurus were modeled after what Swamiji did and how Swamiji taught in America. But importantly, the energy by which he was able to do this was that energy he received 2 or 3 days before Sri Ramakrishna kicked the mortal coil. That energy is Kālī, as we'll point out in just a few moments. Okay, I'm almost there. I'm almost at the end of the lecture, and then we'll take a nice Q&A, hopefully. So here we go. Later, he was talking to Sharat Chandra Chakrabarti, like one of his first disciples, Sadanandaji. And they were having a conversation about resting. This is very important because Swamiji is working so hard. He worked himself to death. He worked tirelessly in America. He worked tirelessly in London against the Christian missionaries who were scandalizing him and preaching against India and whatnot. He corrected those false views. He made great disciples. He preached the message of Advaita Vedanta, the unity of all religions, the harmony of the oneness of existence, the inherent divinity of the human soul. All these really edgy ideas. He was preaching them from every public platform without a microphone. Right? Just huge auditoriums. He would just project his voice, give 8 lectures a week, that kind of thing. 9, 10 lectures a week sometimes, intensely working. So of course he ruined his health. He ruined his physical and mental health, you could say, because he was so used up. And so Sharat Chandra Chakrabarti wanted him to take rest. And you know what he said? This is so interesting. He cited this instance where 2 or 3 days before Sri Ramakrishna kicked his body, this energy entered into him. And then he said, this body was not made to be idle. All these things that I'm doing, it's that energy, Kālī, who is in me, making me work. So I'm paraphrasing, but what Swamiji is saying is that he can of his own self do nothing. Everything that's happening is this energy within him, pushing him into this position, into that position. So he feels like he's being driven by his slave driver, the Divine Mother. After all, he became her slave. And now this energy is forcing him to work. He can't take rest. He literally cannot take a break because the energy within him will not permit it. Isn't that a remarkable idea, a scary idea, a thrilling idea? But he himself said so. And so it's true, like when he was staying in Sturdy's house, his little brother, Mahendranath Datta, reminisced about this thing. Apparently, Swamiji couldn't sleep at night because when he would lie down, he'd be filled with this bliss, and then he would have to get up and start dancing or something. Or sometimes he'd be filled with a tremendous compassion for humanity that he would get up and start crying. In Belrumat, one of the other brother monks, direct disciples, saw him walking back and forth crying because somewhere else in the world, in Fiji, a ship had sunk or a volcano had exploded or something like that. So he would be up all night crying because people were in suffering and he felt the need to save them and help them or serve God in the form of the suffering people. But also he would be up all night in bliss. Or he would be up all night composing lectures to give the next day. Or he would be up all night sleeplessly writing correspondences. He kept up a very heavy correspondence. And so the point here is that this energy that transferred between Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda was the energy by which he enthralled audiences in America, in London, and in India. It's that energy speaking through him. And it was such a powerful force that the poor guy couldn't even sit down or lie down or take a break. He had to do, he was going about his mother's business. You know how Jesus in that story, in that one scene in the Bible, the parents were they were looking for him, they lost him. And then when they found him, he was sitting amongst all these pundits, giving a very learned discussion. And they were like, bro, what are you doing? Come back. And they caught Jesus and he's like, wait, don't fuss. I have to be about my father's business. Just like that. Swamiji was literally a man on a mission. But it was the Divine Mother alone who was doing everything through him. You see, we are of the Ramakrishna Vivekananda lineage. But Kālī is the secret in this lineage. It's Kālī, Kālī, Kālī. Kālī at the core of everything. Because Swamiji cited this power as Kālī. To Shara Chandra Chakrabarti in that particular conversation, he said, this power is making him do everything. That's why his body was not meant to be idle. But he called it Kālī. So what happened was the energy that was in Sri Ramakrishna transferred to Swami Vivekananda, and that energy Swamiji identifies as Kālī. It's a very interesting point. So that's the second story. Now the third story. And this story is the most exciting, I think. The most thrilling, because Swamiji went to Amarnath to see Shiva, the Swayambhu Lingam, in the Amarnath cave. It's an icicle, just Shiva made of ice. And he observed intense austerities. He went into the shrine naked except for a kaupina, covered in ash, having taken the bath in all the various rivers, having done japa and all manners of purificatory rites. Anyway, he walked into the shrine. He isn't there long because he's overwhelmed by the presence of Shiva. Later, he would tell people that he attained the siddhi known as Amarana. The Amarnath is the giver of immortality. So apparently, upon visiting Shiva in Amarnath, he had a vision, he had an experience, and Shiva told him that he won't die until he chooses to die. He can only leave his body when he wants. That was what he gained in Amarnath. So it's up there. It's in Kashmir. It's kind of high and it's icy and all that. And it's very much like a Shiva bhava. Okay. So when Swamiji came down, he was like just out for a long time. He was just always deeply absorbed in meditation. It was very hard to talk to him, to bring his mind down like that. He was in another plane. He was barely present in his body, barely aware of the world. But then once he started regaining consciousness or outward consciousness to some extent, it's very interesting. He suddenly became super obsessed with Mother. And Sister Nivedita reports this. He became single-pointedly obsessed with Divine Mother, but this is important, in a particular way that was different from previously. Now he became obsessed with suffering, with misery, with pain, and with the Divine Mother's expression as all of these things. Now this is interesting. Is Swamiji just being an edgelord? Is this just his like goth boy period? Because this is really like edgelord behavior. Now he only wants like a goth god. He only wants Kālī in the form of terror and destruction and death. He became single-pointedly obsessed with the Divine Mother in her destructive aspect. That's one unique thing that happened after Amarnath. And so Sister Nivedita writes very poetically, I'm paraphrasing now, but she writes that he was trying to attain an Advaita by recognizing God in the terrible. So he started reveling in suffering, in pain and misery. And God knows his life was a load of misery, as he himself says. He says, it's the Ati Dukkha Marga. You know what he said in the Amba Sutra? He said, Mother, by your vilasa, by your sweet play, you have led me through the most painful path to perfection. He says in the last verse of Amba Sutra, he says the exact words he used in Sanskrit were Ati Dukkha Marga, the path of Ati, supreme pain. So Swamiji claims that his life was really miserable, really painful. And that's the bliss that he experienced, the bliss in misery, in pain. So he became obsessed with this idea of Kālī, Kālī the destroyer, the dark god, the terrible. And he became obsessed with the worship of the terrible in the name of Advaita, to try to understand God in all of her phases and in all of her expressions. Now something very important happens. So this third episode is again another turning point in the life of Swami Vivekananda. He goes to a place in Kashmir. They're all staying on a houseboat. Josephine McLeod, Miss Ole Bull, and Sister Nivedita. They're all staying on this houseboat, incidentally owned by Swami Lakshmanju's parents, because many Brahmins at that time in Kashmir went into the houseboat business. So Swami Lakshmanju, his parents actually owned this houseboat that Swamiji was staying with his disciples on. Okay, so he's on this houseboat, and one day he just leaves and goes to this temple, a beautiful temple, ancient temple where the Divine Mother is worshipped, Shir Bhavani. And there he performs intense austerities. Mainly he's doing, I think, havans. He's doing, we know Swamiji was not very ritualistic, but it seems by some accounts that he performed the Kumari Puja. So he worshipped Ma as a little girl. He did some kind of havans, like homas, fire ceremonies, the Divine Mother, and who knows what else, maybe japa, deep meditation. We don't really know what his sadhana was, but from what he seemed to let on, he was doing havans. And then he was possessed, seized by this patriotic spirit. Because, what happened in Shir Bhavani is that there was a Mughal invasion and they desecrated the temple. They destroyed the temple, they took the image and they threw the image into the water. Please hear me now. This is perhaps one of the most important things I could be saying in this time. Okay. What happened was Swamiji felt anger. He felt a righteous indignation. How dare the Mughals come to this place? How dare they desecrate this place? How dare they take the image and throw it into the ocean? If I was there, I would have never let this happen. I would have defended this place with my lifeblood. Okay, please listen very closely to what I have to say next. Again, this is preaching to the choir. This is not the audience that needs to hear this, but maybe those who do, by Mother's grace, will feel this sentiment. It's very important in this time. And it's always been important. It's always important, this next teaching. So Swamiji felt this feeling. And then he said, and he even like took up a vrata and he said, I won't leave this place. I'm going to defend it. I'm going to stay here and defend the Divine Mother. He felt this feeling of Mother is in danger. Sanatana Dharma, eternal religion, the Vedas, the Upanishads, they're in danger. Oh my God. And I am the protector. I will stay here and I will protect Sanatana Dharma. I will protect the Divine Mother against the Mughal hordes or something like that. Okay. This was the Swamiji's patriotism. He's a Kshatriya. He was feeling this. Then you know what happened? Allegedly, during meditation, he heard a disembodied voice. And you know what? Sharat Chandra Chakrabarti, his disciple, who was very rational, very Advaita Vedanta, took him up on this. He was like, but you yourself told me these visions can be hallucinations. You yourself told me that what you hear in meditation can be an echo of the Atman, just left over from thoughts and emotions. And Swamiji said, be that as it may, my child. Baba, like you can't deny it when you hear it. So Swamiji felt like this was an authentic spiritual experience and that this disembodied voice was the voice of the Divine Mother. Sharat Chandra Chakrabarti was kind of hesitant or reluctant to admit this or to accept this. He thought that maybe it was like a projection or something, just like Swamiji felt about Sri Ramakrishna's visions. But Swamiji believed in this vision and it was a turning point for him. Something changed. So you know what happened? He heard this voice and it was like the Divine Mother's laughter. I don't know that she was laughing, but she said in so many words, it was my will alone that this place was desecrated. Please take these words very seriously. It is the Divine Mother's will alone. Every single thing that happens, everyone that is tortured, everyone that is killed, every temple that is destroyed, every horror, every tragedy, and every triumph and everything beautiful has all happened by her will. There is no such thing as the devil. There is only one power in this universe, and it's the Divine Mother, and it's by her sweet will that all of this happened. She is the Mughals. She is the desecration of the temple, and it makes her so happy to see the temple desecrated. So she laughed, I think, and said to the divine, and said to Swami Vivekananda, he's like, if I wanted, I could, of my own sweet will, construct a 7-story temple made of gold. Those were her words. If I wanted, I could have a 7-story temple made of gold, but I want to stay in a dilapidated temple. And then she said something even more important. Who protects who? Am I protecting you, or are you protecting me? As my dear friend said in this house one day, do you protect Dharma or does Dharma protect you? Almost exactly what the Divine Mother said. And then look, it's one thing, like you might, like now at this point, somebody who is of that patriotic disposition will say something very enjoyable there. So he said something very interesting, like, no, but Mother wants me to put, like, it's all Mother's play, but I am part of that play and I am the defender. Yeah, sure. If that's how you feel, that's how you feel. But Swamiji was changed by this experience. This is a spiritual experience. You guys, it's not an intellectual concept. It's not a philosophical idea meant to be against Hindutwas or anything like that. It's not that. It's something deeper. It's a spiritual experience which has a transformative effect on the psyche. And so when Swamiji heard these words, he had a total change of heart. He was no longer interested in being the patriotic defender of Shir Bhavani. He was able to accept everything. In his own words, he wrote to Frankincense, I could live in a house full of prostitutes and never say a word of reproach to them. I could hug the devil himself if there were any. You know, like he had accepted the totality of existence and then he gave up the project. He came back to the houseboat and he brought with him marigolds and he started worshiping all the women on the boat with the marigolds. You know, and then having worshipped the women, he then said, gone is all my patriotism, much to the chagrin of everyone present. Because remember, these are all Western women who have given up all their money to follow this Swami out to India in order to do his mission. They were all inspired by his mission, so they're there for his mission. And now here he is on the boat after this experience saying, I am no longer interested in my mission. I'm done. Gone is all my patriotism. And then he says, no more mutts. I don't want to build any ashrams anymore. I don't care. No more Hari Om, he said. This is exactly his words. No more Hari Om. In other words, who can understand what he meant, right? Like, is he saying, I'm not an Advaita Vedantin anymore? I'm no longer interested in Brahman. He's no longer interested in Hari Om. In other words, he's no longer interested in God as just Pranava Shabda, primordial, Nishkriya, Nishkama, Brahman. Like, I don't know what he meant, but he said that. And then he said, now it is all the mother. Now it's all mother only. And according to Sister Nivedita, the air on the houseboat was so charged. And in her own words, she said Swamiji was a transfigured presence or something like that. So something had really changed in Swamiji. And it's true. From that point on, he was mad. He seemed to be in this like ecstatic state where he seemed to be kind of finished with the work, the heavy load of work that he'd been doing throughout his life. He kind of just like finished with it. And he started expressing these more ecstatic sentiments. Of course, he's a very complicated character. So in one letter he wrote to Miss Ole Bull, he was like, I just want the boys to not interfere with my fight. I'm fighting and I will go on fighting. Come hells, come the gods, come even mother, I will fight mother. You get letters like that, where Swamiji seems to be trying to establish a mutt in Kashmir, and the authorities, the British authorities in Kashmir won't let him establish his mutt, and he wants to fight for it. And so he seems to still be kind of active and still interested in the mission. But after this experience, something seems to have shifted. He seems to have gone into like a sort of divine madness or something, which is what Kālī does. She totally what do you say? She destroys your sense that you can do anything and totally subjects you to her own will. And when you look at her, you see this is not a woman who would allow you any say in the matter. Like she's going to do what she's going to do, whether you like it or not. John, that's a good question. Sublimates, not quite. I think I'm looking for something like suppresses or bludgeons or destroys or consumes. Like so I want a dramatic word that implies the total surrender of a mind rendered mad through sensing the inscrutable will of the Divine Mother, which manifests in the terrible. You cannot have this until you worship her in the terrible. Meaning, you cannot have it until you worship Kālī. You can worship Mother in any way. I'm talking about Kālī. I'm talking about the Mother Kālī, who is the destructive aspect of the Divine Mother. Amba is so many things. Amba is Lakshmi, Saraswati, Durga. She's all of these things. But I'm referring to a particular phase in her personality. And so a Kālī Bhakta can be many things because a Kālī Bhakta might focus on many aspects of the Divine Mother. But now I'm focusing on what Swamiji called the worship of the terrible. So this experience of total, like being stunned, like totally like submitting to the will of the Divine Mother can only come through seeing her in this aspect and recognizing her totality, which includes even the desecration of the temple, which includes all the worst stuff in life, the personal tragedies, the pain and the misery that we experience. Seeing God in that is like the feeling of being overwhelmed by her will. And then comes a blessed madness. So when Swami Vivekananda says, no more Hari Om, that's an interesting point. He's maybe transitioning from Shanta Brahmavada to this more tantric non-dual experience, but specifically the experience of Shakti as Kālī. Yeah. Okay, now this is where it gets interesting. He pens the poem Kālī the Mother, and probably around the same time, he was also working on the Bengali poem and Let Shyama Dance There. I'm going to close this whole thing by reading those things to you because those are very profound. But I want to point this out. Mother Kālī is free. Remember, Brahman is aparicheda, no limit, which means it's Advaita. Advaita means it's free because freedom is defined as the lack of limits, and limits are defined as where one thing starts and where another thing ends, according to the Vedanta Sara at least. So if Kālī is free, then she expresses her freedom as the totality of this appearance, of this entire universe. Swami Vivekananda at Shir Bhavani experienced Mother in pain and in misery and in suffering, in horror. And he called this the worship of the terrible. And when he had this experience, it so transformed him. He became ecstatic and mad and surrendered. But he, in ecstasy, penned this poem called Kālī the Mother. And the very last line is interesting. It's a kind of harrowing invitation to all of us. He says, who dares misery love? This is, again, Swamiji in his most edgelord, right? Most goth kind of experience. Who dares misery love? Who dares hug the form of death? Who will dance in destruction's dance? To him the mother comes. So who gets Kālī? A person who is willing to see God in misery. You have to love misery. Who dares misery love? Will you invite it? Say to Mother, I dare you, Mother. Bring misery into my life, I will love you then. Who can have the courage to say that? You have to be mad. You have to be absolutely mad, willing to sacrifice your home, your family, your health, your mind, willing to see the world plunge into war and nuclear disaster. You have to be willing to have all of this happen to you. To say this in front of Ma, what madness to be able to say, I love you, Ma. I love you no matter what. Like, you may kill me, you may cut my head with one clean chop, or you may use a handsaw, whatever. You can torture me in like some kind of political prison or something like that. And still, I will never give up saying Kali, Kali, Kali. Still, I will be excited. Still, I will be in love with you because I want to see you in that form, which is the accomplishment of total Advaita. Because it's one thing to see God in the good, that's wonderful. To see even God anywhere is hard. So to see her in the good is wonderful, it's huge. But to see her in the terrible, arguably, is the finishing school of this program. So Kali can be considered that, taking us beyond all our time-based, space-based, linguistic concepts of good and bad. And so seeing God in the bad is that kind of maddening, jarring experience of finally being free of the duality of good and bad. So this poem, Kali the Mother, is very important because it shows the dark side of God and it shows this particular bhava. And so this is what you might call the Vamachara in one sense. If Vama is defined as Vamangi, woman, the one who sits to the left of Shiva, Kali, then in one sense, Vamachara, with its embrace of the cremation grounds and with its embrace of all those things that the codes of conduct of society reject, is really an attempt to attain Advaita, perfect transcendence of notions of pure and impure, right and wrong. So Swamiji attained his fullest Advaita, which remember is not the Advaita Vedanta of seeing the world as ignorance, but rather the Advaita, Shakta Advaita of seeing the world as real and also really horrific and accepting the fullness of that, you could say. So anyway, that's one interpretation anyway. So Kali the Mother and Let Shyama Dance there are very important poems, songs really. One is a poem. The English one is a poem. The Bengali one is a song. But they're very important because they show this phase of Swamiji, which we don't really talk about, which is the worship of God in the terrible. Okay, almost done. One last episode. And this is the end of Swamiji's life. Like literally on the day that he died. So this might be the last song that he ever sang, by the way. He was in the shrine. He meditated for 3 hours. Who knows what happened? But on his way down, and some of you have been there. There's like a courtyard and there's the old shrine there where Swamiji used to sit and meditate. And when he's coming down, he was apparently kind of like drunk, and people saw him singing in this ecstasy, this song, Shyama Ma Kiyama Kalo, Kalo Re. This beautiful song of like, is my mother really black? And she's Purusha, she's Prakriti, sometimes she's yellow, sometimes she's blue. Like there's a beautiful song of like the inscrutability and the totality of Kali. But at the very end, the song says, thinking about you, Komalakanta has gone mad. In trying to understand you, Komalakanta has gone mad. And Shankara says in Kalakashtakam, even the gods don't understand your true nature. Swamiji, his final song, remember, going back to my first story, Swamiji is singing Amar Matanghi Tara Tumi Triguna Dhara Parat Para. He's singing that song in the beginning. His final song is to Kali. And his final song in his life was this expression that, is my mother really black? She's yellow, she's blue, she's red. She's Purusha, she's Prakriti, she is the void. And you know what? I don't know. At the end of the day, I just don't get it. I just don't understand her. And in trying to understand her, I've gone mad. Swamiji would sign letters, ever yours in madness, Vivekananda. I, Saki, fill the cup. Let us be mad. Ever yours in madness, Vivekananda. So he attained this Advaita, where his mind was totally rendered asunder by the force of Kali. And this was the last song he ever sang. And you know what's interesting? He also wanted there to be a Kali puja on that day. Interestingly, he had asked, we don't really talk about this, but he asked people to have a Kali Puja, the boys at the ashram. He wanted there to be a Kali Puja. Of course, he died, and so they were so grief-stricken, they couldn't do the Kali Puja. But days later, they honored his wish, you know. A Kali Puja was actually performed. Kali Puja, the worship of Kali, was performed because Swamiji requested it. I think on his last day of life. So I just want to point this out. Swami Vivekananda had a very special relationship with the Divine Mother. He felt that every single thing that he did was the Divine Mother acting through him. And I want to close with this profound statement that he gave to Sister Nivedita. He told her that, she says, won't the world sooner or later recognize that Sri Ramakrishna is the incarnation of Kali? This is an important language. Sri Ramakrishna is the incarnation of Kali. Those were Sister Nivedita's reflections. And they were having this conversation about why Swamiji never preached Kali. And he said, it's my special fad. It's peculiar to me. Those special methods that I myself do, I don't feel the need to preach. I'm paraphrasing, but these are more or less his sentiments. He was saying that, like, why should I tell people about Kali? It's not universally applicable. It's not for everyone. Kali worship is my thing. It's what I do. And he accepted the whole, like he said to Sister Nivedita regarding the Bali, she was very squeamish about the killing of the goat in the Kali Puja. He literally said, what's wrong with a little bit of blood to complete the picture, or something to that effect. He could have said, Sister Nivedita said, he could have said that, oh, you Westerners kill goats for your stomach. At least we are killing for God, or something like that. And these Kali temples are basically slaughterhouses, as Swami Mayoganandaji put it so nicely yesterday. But see, Swamiji accepted all the phases of Kali Puja. Sri Ramakrishna was very like kind of sensitive to this goat sacrifice. He would hide when it was happening. Saradama forbade it entirely. But Vivekananda, he said this interesting thing, no, what's wrong with a little bit of blood? Who knows? What he means by Kali Puja, nobody knows. What kind of sadhana he was doing for Ma Kali, nobody knows. You can speculate, was it Panchamakara stuff? We know he worshipped the young girl, the Kumari, he did a Kumari Puja. But like, who knows what he was doing? Was it japa? He was not very ritualistic, so perhaps it was some deep meditation, some deep contemplation. What did Sri Ramakrishna teach him on those Tuesdays when no one else was around, when the doors were locked? Who knows what Sri Ramakrishna, the master of Tantra, the master of the right hand, left hand, and middle hand paths, who knows what Sri Ramakrishna transmitted to Swamiji? Who knows? But one thing we do know, Swamiji said to Sister Nivedita that Kali worship is my special fad. And the reason he never felt like preaching it was because he didn't feel like it applied to everybody. Those 60 of you who are in the room right now, maybe it doesn't even apply to all of us. Maybe some of us are here because we like the Advaita Vedanta stuff or the Kashmir Shaivism stuff. Maybe some of you are here because you think I'm cute. I don't know why you're here. But I can almost guarantee you that what I'm talking about now might not be for everybody. In fact, Swamiji himself said it's not universal. And he said, what's universally true, I preach. Advaita Vedanta is universally true. I preach the message of the Upanishads because that's universal. It applies to everyone. Every single person needs to know that they are inherently divine, that they are pure and ever free. Everyone needs to know that there is only one, that there is a oneness of all existence. Everyone must be aware of Brahman, Satchidananda Brahman. That's going to be empowering to everyone, no matter if they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu. Like, this idea is for all. Kali worship, maybe not. You know, what I feel in my life is that it's becoming more and more universal. Thank you, Rohanji. That's what I was looking for, actually, some validation for that. But I'm feeling now, because of the messages that I get every day, that Kali seems to be more present in people's lives. Sometimes it's out of vanity, but most of the times it's out of curiosity. But every now and then it's out of like a genuine spiritual experience. People can't deny it anymore. Like, they're having dreams, they're having visions, they're experiencing the divine mother, God as mother. And they're coming to things like embodied spiritual practices, tantra. There's a resurgence of ritualism in neo-pagan communities. Like, you can't deny that post the 60s, maybe even after the 70s, after the 90s, like there's this sort of vacuum for the things that Kali offers, and that seems to be making itself known. I don't know. Who am I to make any broad sweeping statements about the way things are in society? Who knows? The opposite is almost always also true. But Swamiji felt like, at his time at least, Kali worship was not important to teach because it applied, like he said, only to him. But I want to make this point that it really applied to him, that it was something very unique and special that he did. And you can see that, and he even said it helps me in all my secular work, almost as if to say the power by which he constructed mutts and the power by which he built the Ramakrishna mission was Kali's power. Now, he said something else to Sister Nivedita, which I want to close with. It's a profound statement. He said, and Sister Nivedita said, don't you think in the fullness of time or like in the future, people will see Sri Ramakrishna as an incarnation of Kali? And then he said in response to that, and I paraphrase, I'm sure of it, or I have no doubt of it. Kali herself dredged up the body of Sri Ramakrishna for her own ends. Sri Ramakrishna would say, I'm a pillowcase. You know, Sri Ramakrishna always the devotee. If you poke him, you might find that what you feel there is Kali. He himself would say that at time to time, that Kali alone is in him saying all these things. But Swamiji said it. Swamiji, perhaps the best interpreter of Sri Ramakrishna of all time, in this private conversation with the Nivedita, said that Kali dredged up this body called Ramakrishna for her own purposes, agreeing with Sister Nivedita that Sri Ramakrishna is an incarnation of Kali, not an incarnation of Brahman necessarily, but an incarnation of the active, dynamic aspect of Brahman called Kali. Then, this is interesting, he said, I am sure of it. There exists a power in this universe that considers itself feminine. He said that to Sister Nivedita. He said, I'm sure of it. There's a power in this universe that considers itself feminine. And then, and this is interesting, he was working on a book. He never released it. But in that book, he was talking about Brahman, and then he was talking about Shakti, and he was talking about Shakti as a person. So both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda were non-dualist. But I want to make this very important point. They were theistic non-dualist in that they accepted the oneness of all existence, but they were also ready to admit that this was, properly speaking, called God, and that this being had a personal aspect. It wasn't just being in and of itself. It is a being, a person that can be seen and spoken to, and who for her own sweet, inscrutable will conjure up a world and create war. She just likes it. And then who knows why? And we are all her puppets, her sock puppets in this drama that she's playing with herself. Swamiji was convinced of that, and he wrote it down as part of the notes for his book, which he never released. And he said it's a person. He used the word a person. And in this other conversation with Sister Nivedita, he said, I'm sure of it, there exists a power which considers itself feminine. These are mysterious statements, and obviously, like now, there's a new edition of the Letters of Swami Vivekananda. So, I highly recommend that you get a copy. It's like all these new letters in chronological order that have come out for the first time, and we're learning so much about Sri Ramakrishna and about Swami Vivekananda and about our lineage that we have never before heard. Do you know why? Because it just wasn't the time for it. In Swami Prabhavanandaji's time, he was the first one to start worshipping Kālī, like in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Late 30s, he started the Kālī worship in the Hollywood Vedanta Temple. So in the Hollywood Vedanta Temple, we come from a long lineage of worshipping Kālī in public. But prior to that, oh my God. I mean, even now, you guys, like to present Kālī gives Hinduism a bad rep. For many audiences in the world, it's like, oh my God, this is who they worship? She's covered in blood, she's naked, she's holding a severed head and a sword, and like everything the Christian missionaries are saying is true. Like these are all heathens, they're pagans, they're superstitious, they're worshipping some jungle goddess of death. And here's the thing, the modern Advaita Vedanta community will be like, and what do you mean that God is a person? God is a principle, you guys. God is existence. God is being. God is not a person. It's not an energy that creates, maintains, and destroys that you can see and speak to. That's all true in avidya. That's only true in the dream. You have to wake up. But Swamiji and Sri Ramakrishna, in whose lineage we belong, I don't think would make those claims. They have made those claims in some places, but it seems like their uttama claim, their final claim, seems to be this. And I'm making this claim based on their lives. It seems to be that they were theist. That as long as they were not in nirvikalpa samadhi, they were dualist. So then how do we answer the question for today's lecture? Is there free will or is there determinism? The answer is both. Some people make a mess of things by being compatibilist. They say it's both at the same time. That's not what I mean. I'm not making a compatibilism statement here. God forbid, I would never dilute my absolute theism and determinism in that way. It's not like there is some free will and there is some determinism and God does some things and he lets humans be free to do some other things. Never I would say that. But some people say it's absolute freedom. God is absolutely free. I am God, so I am absolutely free. That's true, but it's half of the truth. The other truth is God alone does everything. I can of my own self do nothing. I am but a machine. She is the operator. So I like absolute determinism and I usually speak that way. But both are equally true depending on what frame of reference you use. If you are nirvikalpa samadhi, nothing is determined because there is no universe. In nirvikalpa samadhi, aham brahmasmi makes sense. You feel that immediately to be true in the most immediate way possible. The statement that I am absolutely free makes sense. There's no willing in Advaita experience, in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So the claim that I'm going to make along the lines of my lineage is this. Brahma Jnana is confined to Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Of course, it can inform and inspire you outside of that experience. But the Ramana Maharshis of the world articulated their Advaita within the shrines of Samadhi. And outside of their silence, they were conveying something of that silence. And now people sit for a few moments in silence, unblinking, and they think they have it. They do actually. They do. In that silence and in that stillness is Brahman. But only in Nirvikalpa Samadhi does one feel it in the truest sense of the word. And Sri Ramakrishna would equate Nirvikalpa Samadhi to Brahma Jnana. In that moment, absolute freedom. Okay, in that sense, you will feel freedom. But anytime you're outside Nirvikalpa Samadhi, in other words, anytime you feel yourself to be this body-mind, like now, Sri Ramakrishna would say, and Swamiji would say, the correct attitude is to remember always that you are one with God, but to act and live and move as a devotee, to feel yourself to be the servant of God, the devotee of God, the child of God, and to be firmly convinced of this one fact, which if you are convinced, you will never have anxiety ever again. This fact, that everything happens by the will of God, not even a leaf moves by the will of God. So if you want Advaita, you can have it. Obviously, in our community, we're so much into Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism and all of that. But actually, when you look at how we live our lives, how our gurus lived their lives, and how Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji lived their lives, it's as super bhaktas, as vigyanis, people who feel themselves to be machines operated on by the Divine Mother. So the takeaway of all of this is that you are both absolutely free and absolutely determined at the same time. Freedom is only true of Kālī. But you ultimately are Kālī, and it's only when you are truly drunk in Nirvikalpa Samadhi that you can say, verily, I am Kālī, when you really feel that. Outside of that, you know that, but you still feel like her servant. And so outside of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you feel like the perfect bhakta. So that's the concluding remark of today's question. Is there free will or determinism? Am I free or am I Mother Kali's slave? And the answer is you're both free and you're both Mother Kali's slave. And the sooner we can accept our slavery, in other words, the sooner we can submit fully to the will of the Divine Mother, the sooner we will taste the absolute freedom of being the Divine Mother. Synonymous. Jīvanmukta is one who recognizes that God alone is the doer. This is Sri Ramakrishna's definition. And I'd like to close there. So thank you so much, one and all, for coming. It was a long one, longer than usual. But I hope you enjoyed. And I'm going to close with the poem, Kālī the Mother. And I think it's very important to me, especially in this time, in the and at all times, in the midst of war, that we reflect upon this aspect of God, God's Kālī aspect, if you will. So I'm going to read to you now from this In Search of God and Other Poems by Swami Vivekananda. So this is Kālī the Mother. And then later, I'll turn off the recording, we'll take some Q&A, and then after the Q&A, I'll read to you an even scarier one, the Bengali song, And Let Shyama Dance There. But that's for later. Let's start with this, Kālī the Mother. Swamiji says, the stars are blotted out. The clouds are covering clouds. It is darkness, vibrant, sonant. In the roaring, whirling wind are the souls of a million lunatics just loosed from the prison house, wrenching trees by the roots, sweeping all from the path. The sea has joined the fray and swirls up mountain waves to reach the pitchy sky. The flash of lurid light reveals on every side 1,000 shades of death, begrimed and black, scattering plagues and sorrows, dancing mad with joy. Come, mother, come, for terror is thy name. Death is in thy breath, and every shaking step destroys a world forever. Thou, time, the all-destroyer, come, O mother, come. Who dares misery love and hug the form of death, dance in destruction's dance? To him the mother comes. I pray to the Divine Mother Kālī that we may develop this heroic disposition, this fearlessness, this absolute reckless abandon, this devotional madness, whereby we can see, even in the worst of things, in our personal life and in the world around us, the presence of the Divine Mother's will. I pray to her that we may learn to submit to that will and enjoy the play as only a devotee of Kālī can. May we all become totally smitten. Oh, may we become true devotees. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Shri Ramakrishna Deva Ki Jai.